This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive to put me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions, Jack.
Ooh, welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 287. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have with us a very special guest coming in for part 2 of our episode from a little while ago, Wound Becomes Portal, Dr. Neşe Devenot from Psymposia. How are you doing, Neşe?
Doing great. Yeah, happy to be here.
We're very excited to have you. We had a lot of fun with your colleagues a little while back and talking about your new 200-plus page report, the Psychedelic Syndicate, which was a fantastic piece of investigative journalism, I would say. I guess we thought, but we weren't able to have you on.
Yeah, that was our
group.
The one regret of that great episode was that we couldn't have you on during it, but we're really excited to have you here talk one-on-one about like various things that have even like been happening since the time of that episode. We were just like Dimitri and I think, and you were telling us about this like Bryan Johnson like live stream psilocybin trip, which really was like beyond what I even expected. This is kind of like a curated experience for like trotting out some of the most like sus people like in the sort of nexus of like the psychedelic space and like the sort of techno-futurist like AI world and like all of this stuff and like the longevity, like don't die type of things, like all around, like watching one of the most someone with one of the most repugnant ideologies, I think I can imagine, like undergoing this experience, and to kind of curate it for us and tell us what to think about it. So it's something very, very interesting to watch. So we're looking to get into some of that. But I think maybe we wanted to start. We were hoping like maybe give us a narrative of your like journey in the sort of psychedelic space or around the discourse of psychedelics, and what brought you from your original interest in this topic to working with Psymposia and the work you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. So this is actually my, someone referred to it as like a quinceañera, my 15th year working in the field. This year, this semester, fall semester, I started working in the field, like participating in like the conferences, and I was a graduate student at the time at the University of Pennsylvania, doing a psychedelic reading group there. It was like one of the earlier of this era psychedelic societies that are now kind of everywhere around the world. And so in the 15 years that I've been working in this space, I have, experienced some stuff that made me feel like I needed to say something concerning aspects of it. And so while I remain very interested in psychedelics and intrigued by their positive potentials, which are including but not limited to therapeutic uses, I have felt the need to speak up more about the concern side of things, in part because I felt like I just felt a responsibility to do so. It's like a community service. Like I see that there's a dumpster fire going on that could spread if we don't like put it out, and someone needs to put the fires out, take out the trash. It's not ultimately my like core interest. Like I have other things that spark joy for me that I've like put on hold to do this work. And I think later on, as more of this plays out and more people realize where we were coming from, that's going to be clearer to more people that this was done, the critical work was done as a service to the community.
Yeah, I definitely think that like history will vindicate you guys. Hopefully it's not like too late that people realize like how on point you were, because like we really like it's underappreciated. And I think, you know, before we started recording, you were talking about how like psychedelics or like the push to legalize psychedelics, like uncritically or like, you know, unconditionally is seen as kind of like a progressive or like left wing issue, which like in some, you know, the criticism of the drug war, like there's reasons why that is the case, you know, but like in sort of the people who have emerged kind of in leaders in this field, like, or as leaders in this field, you like really see how there's like incredible overlap with like some of the most like pernicious people in like technology, in like, you know, like in everything, like, you know, people like Mark Benioff and things like that, like are coming out to like talk about psychedelics and like their support for it. The idea that like the sort of nexus between psychedelics and this notion of living eternally, not dying, like, you know, these kind of like bizarre things like medical surveillance, like basically the type, like everything that like would have interested Jeffrey Epstein in the field of medicine is like now kind of like is part of like this kind of gestalt with psychedelics, I feel like.
I said to y'all before we went live that I'm increasingly, with different lines of research, I'm realizing that these milieus are not even that separate. Like it's not even analogous to Jeffrey Epstein in some cases. With some of these people that you've covered in Psymposia, we've covered in a lot of episodes, were literally like, you know, friends with Epstein or had social contacts with him or were funded, you know, in various ways by, you know, he was spreading his like science philanthropy, often, you know, well into the 2010s after he'd been arrested for, you know, his crimes against minors. And you know, he had a very strong interest in these kind of transhumanist, in a lot of cases, I would say like kind of neo-eugenicist ideas. In some ways, I'm realizing that transhumanism is kind of a new sparkly vocab word to like, you know, talk about eugenics, but, you know, not say eugenics because that word is still rightfully tainted from, you know, the Nazis and everything. But yeah, it's like shocking how tight this circle really is. And they're able, I mean, I get that the people in the kind of map scene from the 80s, right? Like Rick Doblin, who I think you've had some interactions with, you know, always did kind of lift up that liberatory, kind of left libertarian kind of side of the equation around, you know, the drugs and the counterculture and the drug war and everything else. But, you know, when you start raising money from, you know, the billionaire class in Northern California, you're going to start hobnobbing with these tech people, as he did, and I think as your work so you know, lays out so well. You know, he almost ended up like a captive of like the PSFC, like these wealthy donors who I think often we live in a hyper-capitalist society. Sometimes we have to question the intentions, right? Like it doesn't actually seem that crazy, but then with all the narrative sculpting that goes on, then you end up sounding like a hall monitor leftist. Or I've seen so many tweets about Symposia's work of woke lunatics or far left radical, you know, like they just can't handle it. That, you know, there's a critique of from the left. I think especially these people that see themselves as kind of like of the historical left, like really cannot handle critiques from the left about this stuff. And I think history is vindicating you now in real time as to just how sketchy some of these like relationships and networks are. And like, I deeply do not feel like their ultimate goal is anything you could call liberatory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't know if you know the philosopher Olufemi Taiwo, but he's been retweeting stuff like leftist progress with like this caption of I do not regret to inform you that we are going to win. And that's sort of been in my head this whole time. It's like very patiently just like watching, like put the stuff out there. Like we're confident in our analysis, and we like we know that our view of this space has explanatory value that will become apparent the more time plays out. And so it's just a matter of like waiting for that process to happen. That like I think it's inevitable that more people will realize what's actually been going on in this field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the like connection with eugenics is interesting, because like one of the things that like really stuck out to me in watching like the recent Bryan Johnson live stream was his connection with like the idea of epigenetics, which like I had some familiarity with, like in terms of like trauma, like the idea that like, you know, trauma can be like passed down in some way, or that it can affect your like the expression of your genes or something like that, you know, like that this can you know, in some way like your environment and like what you experience like in your life can you know, change like your actual like genetic expression or something. You know, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not like a super big expert on it, but I had, you know, heard of this term before in that context. But it was interesting to me like to hear this kind of developed into an idea about like how taking psychedelics can like, you know, because it improves your mental health or something, it will enable you to like, it will change like your genes in a way that will enable you to like live to be 180 years old or something. Mm-hmm. And like the idea that like, yeah, like we don't know, like, you know, the science hasn't been figured out yet if like taking psilocybin once a month is going to let you live to be 180.
Right.
And like, I mean,
they spent a lot of time dwelling on that in the Bryan Johnson live stream. Yes, there was some study, you know.
Yeah, like there was a study that like suggests
with mice.
That the mice lived longer. How much longer did they live?
They emphasized, I forget, and I don't know how significant it is, like the comparative to the lifespan of mice and mice and men.
Yeah.
But I do remember, I forget if it was Ashley Vance or somebody, one of the other kind of psychedelic, you know, therapist people that was on earlier, that kind of emphasized that study, the mice that showed the greatest longevity benefit were ones that took repeated doses, I guess, which would be equivalent to, I don't know if it was for the mice once a month, or like he was kind of implying that humans should take maybe once a month would unlock the longevity benefits, rather than the sort of a more therapeutic, more like psychologically therapeutic, like the sort of one-shot dose that cures you of your PTSD that they like to market.
There was an interesting tension, because I noticed like when one guy who is like a big like microdosing promoter came on, he was like, well, let's not get carried away with like once a month here, you know, like let's make sure that we emphasize it's also good to take it in a microdose. And it's like, yeah, everyone had their own like little grift, and like, you know, they had to make sure that they were advancing that. But yes, it was an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of like the like kind of and this is something that came through in watching that too, was that in terms of like the kind of left wing kind of valence of like the sort of psychedelic discourse and the sort of interest in the subject, you know, like certainly like there's like a stereotype that like if you are like skeptical of some of the ways these are being you know, rolled out or anything, like the sort of things like, you know, the MAPS therapy, people really like failed to make like a, you know, to incorporate nuance into how they talked about, you know, the opposition to that therapy and the FDA's rejection of it. But there's like this you know, association that like, yeah, if you are opposed to psychedelics in any way, or, you know, have any kind of a nuanced take on this, then, you know, you must be some kind of religious reactionary or like a fundy, you know. And it is kind of
working for big pharma.
Yes, and it is well, it is kind of interesting to see like that paradigm is changing now, because I guess the left is perceived, or like the far left is perceived as being the most like weak and the easiest to attack, especially in the current political climate. And now like it's more advantageous to portray the opponents, which maybe was not the case at the time, you know, like, at one time. Maybe it was, you know, at one time more advantageous to say that anyone who was objecting to this must have been, you know, and you can even see, like, if you go back, you know, Psymposia, as you said, has been around for some time. So you can even see this kind of like, you know, prohibitionist angle being used to kind of attack you guys. But it does seem to have shifted kind of with the political winds in a way, where you have, you know, even, you know, people who are like kind of revered by like young, you know, open-minded people of our generation, you know, coming out and kind of like expressing their, such as Hamilton Morris or people like this, expressing their faith in the Trump administration or like the broader kind of right-wing movement to accomplish like this goal. And I mean, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about last time, how a lot of this is kind of symptomatic of like a disconnect between like the issue of psychedelics and like any other like social or political issue. It's like nothing like is worth like, everything can be is expendable. Everything can be dispensed with. Like, it doesn't matter like what, like who gets trampled in the process, as long as we somehow get this drug, like, make it more available to people. It doesn't really, and any like strategy, any kind of, unscrupulous like slanders, anything like that, or just, like allying with any kind of, pernicious person, that's all fine as long as we can make sure that the drug is accessible.
Yeah, like it will have been worth it is kind of their standard line. Same discourse around AI, the AI hype of like, yeah, there might be some negative externalities and like people traumatized and environments destroyed along the way, but this is going to be so good for humanity that it's going to be worth it.
Right.
Yes.
That's what I loved so much about part 4, when you sort of talked about the efforts, it seems, to not only just medicalize this and legalize it in this kind of therapy, construct that's going to make a bunch of money for Peter Thiel and his friends, which is sketchy enough, but the ability to kind of like create a new techno religion out of this as a means of like social engineering and control, which it seems like more than a few of these people are dabbling in now, and like using and especially using the combination of AI and psychedelics and combining those two in a spiritual kind of new age framework with a huge allowance for like raw capitalism also. Like there's no prohibition against capitalism in any of this. And then creating this kind of like American capitalist psychedelic like AI techno religion where we all like, I don't know, take DMT and talk to our like AI god avatar or something like once again, just like with the Epstein stuff, the people pushing AI on the most like insane level right now in our culture and the people pushing psychedelics are often the same people. Like I think there's something deeply concordant about these two pushes that are in a way, like I think in the minds of these people backing it, like are meant to complement one another, right? Like it does seem. And I mean, I think it's like delusional. I mean, to, even think about worshiping a god, AI, or uploading your consciousness to a computer to live forever. But that's what these people are obsessed with. And it's hard not to see how they are going to like utilize psychedelics, if they are more accessible and legalized, whatever, to sort of build something. I mean, it's like they're like using Burning Man as like a training ground for, like the Christiana Musk and the Jurvetsons building these weird art exhibits where, that's where we get the wound becomes portal, like step into the, this kind of Gaia religion kind of like vague Gaia religion, Esalen kind of stuff that it feels like the technologists are stripping it for parts and want to build it into some kind of new machine of belief. And I don't know.
Yeah, the technologies of mass persuasion, especially used in tandem. And I had a paper that I wrote before the Psychedelic Syndicate that kind of informed some of my analysis in that section. It's called Test Real Hallucinations, Psychedelic and AI Hype as Inequality Engines. And in that paper, I mentioned like I was noting just like similarities in the discourse around both things. But then as I dug into it and I realized how it's the same people that are envisioning how to roll these out, I kind of opened up the paper by saying that the presence of these parallels is understandable when one considers their underlying affinities, like two blooms from one plant. The same Silicon Valley and venture capital forces are investing enormous amounts of capital to develop both as cultivars in their own image, selecting for desired traits that further the existing socioeconomic order.
That's fire. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I was saying, no, it's very true. And like, even like before, like noticing that you were like on the same tip, like, having followed your work from before, like I also like noticed like, these are like, it's a strange convergence, that, and also like the the longevity stuff as well. Like, I mean, I remember in terms of what Dimitri is saying about like this is a like kind of has a like bizarre religious dimension. Like I remember like actually it was Bryan Johnson who like was like almost articulated this, something that is I think a theme with a lot of like AI people, you know, from Elon Musk to you know, Sam Altman, like all these, like you can kind of see like the undercurrent there. But I think he almost, I guess because he's like sort of known as being this kind of a figure who like puts these ideas out there like in an explicit form so that they can be signaled to later on, I feel like is part of his role, including with the longevity stuff. But I remember he said like with, you know, he was sitting down with Barry Weiss, I think, of course, who like, you know, she has her whole role like in this ecosystem. And he said something about like, I you know, I think that we had the relationship with God, between God and humanity, exactly wrong. Like God didn't create us, we will create God, and it will be an AI. And it's like, you know, now you have people like who, you know, like Joe Rogan, who like had a lot of these same people who we now see like on Bryan Johnson's live stream. A lot of these same like kind of like psychedelic AI influencers, like tech people, you know, who write these like grind set books or whatever, and or these kind of hagiographies of various tech figures, and then go on these tours. Like, you know, he's promoting the same thing now, where, you know, could Jesus not be a computer or whatever? Could the second coming of Christ not be from a machine?
He said, "What's
and
more
like,
virgin than a computer?"
I mean. But you can actually see how, like, it is interesting because you brought up, I think, in one of your in your actually what you submitted to the FDA, your MAPS is a MDMA therapy cult. You talked about like how like hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming and things like that were like skills and the sort of areas that like people in your interest in psychedelics like actively wanted to cultivate as like part of psychedelic therapies, like looking into how to, you know, manipulate people, make them more suggestible, or to use the like you know, techniques of hypnosis or NLP in, you know, psychedelic therapies or you know, quote unquote therapies. And yeah, you can it's yeah, I forget I lost my train of thought, but well, it is.
Could you explain for us, Neşe, I guess what you laid out in that letter is that MAPS, by its own admission, took its therapy protocols directly from a man named Dr. Stanislav Grof, right? Can you break down like what that lineage of practices?
Yeah, so that's the Rick Doblin who has, you know, founded MAPS and was leading that initiative for many decades. He has stated that Grof is like the reason for them to be doing their trials. Like, so the Grofian Stan Grof therapy was like the basis for the MAPS therapy. But that said, there are other kind of ideas that are popular in the psychedelic underground that have influenced that. So it's not just Grof, it's Grof plus like IFS, internal family systems therapy, and Hakomi, which is a mindfulness-based.
Hakomi, Francois Bourzat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and those kind of are all popular in the underground and kind of work together, depending on the practitioner and how they view it. But definitely in the MAPS protocol, they're all operative. But Grof is the main kind of like impetus for their conception of how the therapy works.
Right. And he has a very long, interesting history with like the psychedelic underground. He came over here. He was from communist Czechoslovakia and then came over here, I think, which was one of the only countries in the sort of the Soviet bloc that I think did like medical experiments on LSD, maybe in the 50s and 60s. Then he kind of soft defects and comes to the West and then falls in with this California kind of scene that's emerging in the 60s. And was he at UCLA for a long time? I think. I
forget if he was at UCLA. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I forget exactly. But he does become very associated with both the Esalen Institute, which is like such a hub of both the psychedelic underground and literally Silicon Valley. Like,
yeah,
like
we were just talking about Betty Eisner too. Like
she
the
was
person
at UCLA,
who like,
yeah.
I guess, you know, she had a big role in like innovating this like, which Psymposia has criticized a lot in the past, like this sort of like male, female, like two, you know, a therapist, which often is like a husband and wife couple, you know, kind of overseeing this psychedelic therapy. Like, you know, that was something that she innovated, I guess. And she was, from very early on, like in the same circles as Stuart Brand, who we were just talking about. Yeah.
Right. They all knew each other.
I know that I think we mentioned this in the Psychedelic Syndicate, the report we did, but in Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, he mentions that like many of the leading kind of psychedelic therapists trained at the feet of Grof at Esalen. So it's like there's this like direct lineage through a lot of the people who are prominent in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. And also the other big one, which is also heavily overlapped in the community, I think we covered this a lot in our Sus Psychedelics episode, which is based on mostly your work from a few years ago, but the California Institute for Integral Studies, right? Was a big train, like more of a direct like institution that would train underground psychedelic therapists, right?
Yeah, that was unpacked more fully in a cover story, Power Trip, which my former colleagues, Dave Nichols and Lily K. Ross, were had developed. So I wasn't directly involved in that project, but yeah, they were really digging into how there was a public facing side of CIIS that is like, you know, people could come and get degrees there, but it was also like many other institutions in this field, in this ecosystem. It was also a portal to the underground where people could get underground training.
Which is, and that also has like a pretty far back history. We did bring that up, I think, again, it came up in our Stuart Brand episode, because I think one of Stuart Brand's, like one of the professors at Stanford that was a big influence on him, I think was a bit of a Christian mystic, was the co-founder of what would become the CIIS with Alan Watts. And, you know, so like even going back to the late 50s, you have these kind of characters kind of coming and setting up shop. A lot of them moved to little houseboats in Sausalito, and they start to form their kind of underground networks that are like already, you know, kind of somewhat robust by the time like the Summer of Love kicks off, or by the time LSD is made illegal in October 1966. You know, but also on top of that, there's the the international IFAS that was run by Willis Harman and Myron Stolaroff in the early 60s. That's where Stuart Brand had his first LSD trip under the guidance of James Fadiman, who's like a very big figure in this scene for decades. I found somebody the other Psymposia people were bringing up, or I forget if we talked about this person, Robert Jesse, who's like kind of a big figure in this scene. I found a lecture at the California Institute for Integral Studies about psychedelics, maybe from like 2013 or 2014. He does an exercise that I found interesting in terms of milieu mapping. He asked everybody in the beginning to like go around the room and name a powerful teacher that you want to be sort of like invoked, or that kind of like led you to like this CIIS lecture, like somebody that was very important getting you into the psychedelic underground. And then everyone says presente after they say their name. I was confused at first. I thought that everyone was saying their name, and I'm like, this is the craziest room of people like ever, because everybody is like a figure. Just to read you a brief list of who brought all this crowd of people who I guess are not, you know, famous or big, but like the people that brought them to go see Bob Jesse at the CIIS. Short list here: Alexander Shulgin, Larry Brilliant, Tony Robbins, Rick Doblin, Jim Fadiman, Carlos Castaneda, Ram Dass, Richard Rockefeller, and Stan Grof. So pretty, you know, that's a pretty discrete, like small network of, that's exactly the network we're kind of talking about, that some of them would go on to be like driving forces behind MAPS, like Dr. Richard Rockefeller, the great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller himself, was a huge supporter of like MDMA therapy and psychedelic therapy, like in the 2000s and early 2010s. But I don't know. So I'm a little spooked out by like some of this milieu, especially after reading Symposia's work, where there was a lot of things. I was already a little skeptical of the kind of Doblin milieu and the Esalen milieu, and this just added more data points. I don't know. And now it feels like we're connecting even more things together. Then it's like, you know, the Epstein thing, and then transhumanism, neo-eugenics, and then the rightward shift. Just maybe circling back to that. I think you're totally right, Khalid, that this is kind of the first time we're seeing this flip where a group like Symposia can be attacked as a radical, woke, left-wing. And it's like, why is that? That's not the language that old school hippies whatever we think about them, would have used, like in talking about critics of like psychedelic whatever. I think it's now that there has been such a push, largely from these Silicon Valley people, to like bring in the military and veterans as the face, right? Which I think you do such a great job of outlining in the Psychedelic Syndicate, right? Like, can you talk a little about the centrality of like the kind of veteran, like what function that serves of making the veteran the figure?
Yeah, well, just as some like tangential context for that point. So I know you talked to last time to Brian Pace about, I co-wrote with him Right-Wing Psychedelia, a paper about the right-wing kind of interest in psychedelics. And at the, like now looking back, it like seems like an obvious like topic, but at the time, this was not the way that people were talking about it. People were like, you know, if we just get psychedelics, pump psychedelics into the veins of the billionaires, they're just going to become pro-social and just want to use their like great wealth for good. And like, there was just this very uncritical propaganda, frankly, about like, you know, how psychedelics turn you liberal, you know, at least. Like, maybe,
No, I mean, we remember, like, that wasn't too long ago, actually. Like, back when we did our episode, like, that was still, like, basically the prevailing idea. And now, like, basically, I mean, Hamilton's comment of, like, so what? People who are right-wing do psychedelics, too. What of it? That's kind of become the thing. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, well, so one of the points that, like, I kind of, like, figured out in my part of that paper when I was thinking it through is that, like, you know, experiences of interconnection, a lot of people have had those types of experiences on psychedelics and then feel more empathetic towards others and curious about people who are different from them. And then they universalize that experience and like assume that everyone's going to have that kind of experience that they did. But when you look at historical and other contemporary examples, people who have like a hierarchy-based ideology can interpret the same phenomenology of interconnection as interconnection to hierarchy, where it's like the great chain of being is the all, and you as, you know, the foot soldier slave, like that's your role. And if you question your role, you're jeopardizing all of the cosmic order. And so
that's a really good point.
That point was really key to me in my own process, because like a lot of my papers, like I'm trying to figure something out and like I am like thinking things through, and that came out as like, okay, like this explains a lot. It explains why it's like plugging into those more authoritarian ideologies like a little software program that runs differently because of the commitment to hierarchy.
Right.
So, and in that paper, we not only said like psychedelics are fully compatible with reactionary right-wing politics, but not only that, we even predicted that psychedelics would become increasingly right-wing as medicalization advanced and it was no longer associated with like indigenous groups and, you know, the Amazon, and it had more of this connotation with like capitalism and the war machine. It was going to be moving more and more in that direction. So it's yet another example where people like to shit on us and like, you know, act like we're just marginalized from the field, but we've been so consistently ahead of the curve with so many things that, you know, and it's because we have this kind of material analysis and this attention to the connections and not just the propaganda, the connections across like different fields and learning from that, not just accepting the cover story of like what people are talking about psychedelics being. So in terms of the veterans, this was a really strategic early, I don't know when he first came, you know, focused on it, but Rick Doblin has for a long time been really advancing the veteran cause. I'm pretty sure like long before I kind of joined the field, and saw it as a sympathetic group that appeals to a broad swath of the population and can get people on board for mobilizing for change. And that is a structural feature of our society that I would argue was designed and put there on purpose. There is a reason why we have this whole, you know, like we could be treating teachers and nurses and you know, service workers with the same level of deference and respect that we are treating veterans. But it's like when you go onto a plane, and like you have the service members go on, like there's this real like concerted effort to perform the value of veterans more than other people who also help to, you know, support society.
Totally.
And so that, you know, one thing that I learned from writing the Psychedelic Syndicate that I knew a little about, but just seeing how the sausage is made was like really opened my eyes in terms of like how much the consulting class engineers society as a performance, because it's like the very wealthy view average people as NPCs that need to be feared. And so, you know, it's like as we started with like Edward Bernays, you know, as the relative of Freud, kind of realizing that you could manipulate people based on their aspirations and fears and anxieties, then playing out decade after decade of people studying the dark arts of mass persuasion, we have reached a place in our society today, especially with the elite control, billionaire control of all the news media and the entertainment platforms and social media. There is a performance to, you know, engineer consent for a specific version of society and how things are going to proceed. And so that veterans appeal to veterans was also used by the opioid industry, and is part of how the whole opioid crisis kicked off. That's been, you know, a big part of my research recently is looking at those parallels. They're using opioid industry tactics to pressure politicians, specifically targeting veterans and overemphasizing the potential for benefit and underemphasizing the potential for harm, which we saw how that played out with opioids.
Of course. It's no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing how like recalcitrant that I like kind of Timothy Leary idea of like putting the LSD in the water and like, you know, and then it will save the world like has been. And people still do kind of act that way and have this kind of zeal that like this, you know, is like a panacea for all of our problems. And in a way, like it really does like have, I feel like I'm always like saying like, this is exactly like what we were just talking about in our last episode. But in a way it is, because like we were just like talking about this with Stuart Brand, how something like the Whole Earth catalog, like that took like the sort of, you know, we always say in the show the 60s, like on the whole were like a psyop. But of course, like there was like obviously an undercurrent like of real dissent and like, you know, real like, you know, left wing, like, sentiment and you know, a real left-wing activity like happening during that time that was like subverted and co-opted. And that's exactly what happened, where you actually have like something that was kind of perceived as part and parcel of this, psychedelics, but in fact it wasn't. It was like that's actually the only thing that has survived of that, and like anything that actually was radical and like was transformative or good about it has been like totally stomped out. And now what we have is like, you know, the excrescence is like this kind of devotion to the drugs, which even at the time you had people like, you know, talking about how this was derailing everything and just had become this kind of bourgeois thing of like, you know, the same thing of like, you know, the sort of communalists buying up like land that had, you know, belonged to like, laborers like and farmers. But yeah, it is crazy like that we're like seeing like, I mean, now, yeah, we're seeing this really like intensify for sure. And I think what you're saying, you know, this goes back to what I was saying before, where like, yeah, it is like a technology like of like control, like someone like Joe Rogan, you know, he's like there, like, I mean, he's not on, I mean, I don't know if to what extent he's on psychedelics like during his podcast, but like he like consumes them, you know, and he is someone who basically has been like, you know, you can actually see like his evolution towards like kind of just being a mouthpiece, like an incredibly influential one, an incredibly popular one, like for like the opinions of this particular clique of people. Yeah, exactly.
The PayPal mafia kind of people.
Yeah.
And, who many of whom, have a slightly uncomfortable like nostalgia for apartheid South Africa, which a lot of them grew up in, that is now really like coming to a fore. But it's
have you seen that elephant graveyard video? I think we linked to it towards the end of the report, but it goes into the kind of the cult of Rogan and how he became like
that's a great
everything
video
that he used to like criticize.
Being a freaking free thinker, but now he has his like UFO cult like comedy club in Austin that, you know, and is just supported by, always has these like one-shotted Navy SEAL operators on his show that did Ibogaine. For some reason, the tier 1 operators love Ibogaine. Like I looked at I think you put was it I forget if it was like Pickard going on one of these like pro ibogaine like podcasts where there's like a big like bearded guy, a big bearded Southern guy who's like going off about like the woke left is like trying to, you know, we need to legalize ibogaine for the operators because the woke left is like just saying some like crazy right wing shit. But like ibogaine specifically has this like war fighter kind of ritual. They're building a kind of cult of the warfighter around it. You can kind of see like some kind of Spartan shit, you know, where you do it once.
Brian Hubbard is the guy they were talking to. He's been a big like he's like a pastor of ibogaine, like really kind of Southern preacher affects like vibe when he's like talking about it.
Yeah, he's got Rick Perry in his group. I think the Jurvetsons support his organization, like the Ibogaine for America Institute or something like that, or American Ibogaine Institute, I think is what it's called. There were some. Yeah,
I mean, when
typical factors.
Well, just one quick thing about the elephant gravy, because Brian Page shared that with us with our group. And watching it, I was so fascinated by the parallel between like our work and what happened in that video, because it's like ultimately the creators of that were pursuing this like question. They were like, why has comedy become so unfunny? And they arrived at the same people and the same actors that like that we arrived at from asking the question of like, why is the psychedelic field so unpsychedelic?
Why is it corporadelic all of a sudden?
Yes.
I can remember the mists of the 2000s, like growing up in the Bay Area, where there was this crunchy maps, like Airwood kind of culture that sort of existed in the underground, and like there it was kind of maybe tolerated. I mean, I lived 15 minutes max from Alexander Shulgin's like drug lab, which was like protected by the DEA for decades. You know, used to drive by it every day, didn't even know it. You know. And like, so there's a little bit of like, oh, it's tolerated, but the general vibe was like that mainstream society was completely hostile to psychedelics and like would punish anybody that was like outward. So when the 2010s start, suddenly you get like these powerful, and mostly they're coming out of like Silicon Valley, but these like very rich, successful kind of mainstream type people that start to talk about it a little bit. And then it starts to get normalized very fast, like fast tracked. Suddenly, like it's unclear exactly what changed, but you know,
it's fascinating how like there are people who like most of them like have no like respect for like religion or like belief in God at all, but they like often like perceive this as a way what they appreciate about it, I think a lot, is like they can, what they think a religious experience is, they can like induce through a drug
with a tool.
And like that is like such a powerful ability to be able to do that. And it's like, well, this could be like great for everything that we're trying to do to like cement our total control over society.
Yeah,
that's like
well, that was one of the really interesting like the report, the way it came together, like there's a lot of like stuff that we found that explains other parts that I'm like, how do we find this? It's like, if we could plant evidence to support our points, like we would put something like this there. Like one of the examples is Steve Jurvetson talking about that idea, where he was just openly saying that like, oh, like the kind of the religion is the opiate of the masses kind of idea. And that's leading people, as, you know, people are not feeling included in the bounty of like the Silicon Valley world. They're turning back to religion as a source of comfort, and that's pulling them away from Silicon Valley. And he was open about saying that like, what if we could kind of like, you know, use this same religious impulse, but in a way that is in line with Silicon Valley's like interests and priorities. And so like he was so open about that point. And then you compare that to what actually has been happening with psychedelics, and it provides some context for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A truly capitalist religion, like a capitalist American religion, they seem to think with the help of psychedelics, like rolled out the right way to the population, they could pull this off and like re-enchant, you know, or you know, give the illusion, like the little Trump accounts that he's giving to every baby gets, you know, $2,000 or something. That's also like backstopped by Silicon Valley. Like you can create the illusion of still getting something out of the capitalist system, which is, you know, I think a feeling that's rapidly fading in modern United States. I think we can sort of see it all around us that like there, less and less people are benefiting from the system. Maybe 30 years ago it was different, but like the social contract starts to fray at a certain point, and yeah, people are going to turn. They're either going to turn to maybe more radical, critical belief systems that don't put capitalism on a pedestal. Both religion and like socialist ideas, basically, don't put it on too high of a pedestal, right? And they don't want that. They don't, they want this mystical cult of like belief and excitement, because this economy that we have is highly financialized and based on these like tech bubbles and VC hype cycles and these unicorn like it's all so kind of abstracted now, like the bread and butter of the American economy. Now we have these server farms that like might not even be online, but like they're throwing out $500 billion to this and it's like holding up half the stock market. Like we're really, like we're in weird waters in terms of kind of being like our ruling class being a little bit like detached from material, I don't know, like materiality in general. So it kind of makes sense that they would try to do like, oh, let's just psyop everybody more. Like we just need to keep psyoping people harder. We have these social media technologies, which this same milieu is largely responsible for giving to us. Mark Zuckerberg was at those Edge dinners, where Epstein was at. And so was Steve Jurvetson. I found him hanging out at I think it was the 2001 Edge dinner with like Sean Parker from like Napster and later Facebook and, Stuart Brand, John Brockman, all the real heads. And I don't know. Now this is where it's ended up for them is they want to. I mean, Sam Altman, lest we forget, I love bringing this up. He said that like the most successful founders found religions. He said it's great to found a company. It's even better to found like a country. But like the best founders found religions. And like okay, like you can see what he's trying there.
Yeah, I mean, when Christian Angermeyer, who's involved in Compass and Type. But both two of the big psychedelic pharmaceutical companies, he has been very open himself and posting on his LinkedIn and stuff about how, he is worried of like an uprising of the masses for like precisely the reasons that you were mentioning of like they're going to feel left out. They're going to be resistant to change, which they presume is like good, that like rather than question why people are like so upset and having such bad mental health, it's like obviously what we're doing is good and we just have to get everyone else up to speed and to be okay with it. And so he explicitly envisions using psychedelics as this kind of soma for the masses to prevent a revolution.
Right. Yeah.
It is like very interesting how like we were just actually talking about this. I'm seeing a lot of connections here with our past episodes, because we were just talking about the idea of feudalism as like a way to describe like the sort of economic status quo or like the political order of like medieval Europe.
Right.
And we were talking about, is it like really more reflective of like our current moment? Like, does the idea of a feudal model as like imagined by people like Marx, does it actually fit closer to the 19th century like to today? And I think that in a way, like I was thinking last time in our conversation with your colleagues, like this sort of idea of like, oh, maybe the early Christians had psychedelics in their sacrament. Like that's not like appealing to people because they felt like, oh, maybe this is historically true or anything like that. Like the historical truth of it, I don't think really matters to them. What matters is like that is a great model of like what they want to create, something that is like what they imagine, kind of this like medieval Catholic Church would have functioned like, where it's like an institution they have total control over that literally is like, they want to create an opiate of the masses that like is, sort of this negative stereotype of religion really, but actually does sort of like, that serves to like subjugate people and get them to like put their faith and have their like sort of belief in something that is completely exploitative and is not good for them at all. I mean, it does also connect with like what Thiel said about why millennials like socialism or whatever. He was saying like, oh, if they don't have any stake in the capitalist system, why would they like support it? Because they can't like afford a home, they can't afford anything, they're living paycheck to paycheck. Like obviously that's going to turn people to socialism. I think that for some of these people, what they imagine is that like, okay, well, we can't actually invest them in this in a practical way because that would reduce like our investment in it, or like that would, we'd have to share like actual, material resources with people. So why don't we invest them in it like ideologically? In fact,
or spiritually even in this like enchant them in the the some kind of mystical conception of being part of some American polity with like a nobly appointed psychedelic aristocracy of founders, you know, that will benevolently rule over, like just like Curtis Yarvin fucking describes, you know. Then they'll peacefully dispose of our affairs and give us wonderment, you know, give us wonder and bread and well, not really bread so much, but maybe circuses. Lots of circuses.
Just
VR headset
bread.
circuses.
But you recommended that article in The Guardian that kind of juxtaposes like your experience with psychedelics as something that like helped you to come to terms with like the fact of death, and like that, you know, death is something that is you know, part of life, with like the Bryan Johnson take on it, which is that like somehow psychedelics are going to get us to escape death. And he had a quote in that article where he said something like he said you know, this will help us to like advance our longevity goals, because if you want people to build a ship, you know, don't teach them how to gather wood and how to build a ship. Teach them to yearn
for the sea. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
I just pulled that quote up just now because I wanted to mention it too.
Yeah,
because I think that kind of explains an aspect, at least, of the live stream, where it's like he is interested in kind of like persuading people to join his mission and to kind of rally behind him and to kind of identify with this longevity project. And so it's like there's a whole parasocial kind of component of that, and audience kind of component of that I think is a big part of the streaming project there, where it's not just his own experiment, it's like signaling and getting people to buy in to this bigger project.
Yeah, definitely. And that was what was so strange and striking about it to me, was that like I thought like that we would be watching like him like trip out and like, you know, what he would say and what he would do, you know. I thought it was kind of just going to be like this kind of a verite thing, but it wasn't like that at all. It was all like kind of like curated and like narrated for us by like these psychedelic influencers, including Hamilton Morris, like most of whom, like, I mean, really, it was like a parade of like, you know, prominent like right-wing voices, and Hamilton Morris, who we're supposed to believe isn't like that, but you know,
mysteriously has not had his left card pulled yet.
Right.
By people paying attention, but
because of this parasocial element, I think like that's exactly what's at play there, where like he has his hooks in people because like he taught them to open themselves to drugs or whatever, like that it was okay to take PCP or something, you know.
If we could for a moment just zoom in on the part of the Bryan Johnson live stream that Hamilton Morris appeared on, because as we went over the last time, he came out pretty hot attacking Psymposia a couple months ago,
terrorists,
borderline libelous on shows like Channel 5 and with Shane Smith and some other ones like that. But I thought immediately when I saw the lineup for this, I literally LOL'd, because we had just talked, with everyone else at Psymposia about like how sus Steve Jurvetson and his wife Genevieve Jurvetson were, and wouldn't you know it, Hamilton Morris like appears simultaneously with Genevieve Jurvetson, and so do we want to break that what they talked about, or like what the vibe of this was? Because, you know, Hamilton's appearing with like a very powerful funder of this entire like psychedelic, you know, kind of therapy effort, right?
And she was a key had a key role in the targeting of Psymposia over the past year as well.
She basically like pushed for the NY Times article, right? Which we
talked
about.
Can you break down like what she personally was up to against y'all?
So we had heard, as we talked about in the report, from someone that there was a hit piece kind of like in the works at the New York Times. This was like months before it came out, over the summer before it came out, something like that. And it was mentioned that the Jurvetsons were behind it, were like really pushing for it. This was before we had any, like, that was just shared with us with no context about like them knowing that we knew anything about the Jurvetsons. It was just given to us as that was a factor behind it. And then once, like, when we start out the Psychedelic Syndicate, we were aware of PSFC, which is the group, the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative that you talked about last time, that she's like a key player in. But the full like connections and the extent of the influence didn't become clear to us until there was this like synchronized mobilization of all of these actors pushing the same narrative, circulating the same kind of like agenda and stories by journalists like Rachel Newer. And so it kind of revealed this like group because they were all working in concert together. So she was very kind of outspoken on social media, pushing this leftist kind of conspiracy, radical, leftist conspiracy about Psymposia, during that whole fallout from the FDA advisory committee with MDMA. So that's like kind of the context of like she's been critical of us in a way, I should say, like similar to the conspiracy she's been pushing about like Zoran Mamdani is the exact same. She shared a video that was like a exact narrative, like the rhetoric of it was the same, describing Mamdani and as she previously described Psymposia as this like sleeper cell, like taking over the Democratic Party from the inside. Like it was the same story that she was, because she just fundamentally sees like labor and labor organizing, like people, working class people doing stuff that's not their agenda as like terrorism.
Now that's very interesting to me, because I think maybe it speaks to the tangled webs that these people are weaving. Because I was just looking into something that, like, something popped into my head from the other day. So Genevieve Jurvetson was attacking Mamdani, doing a classic like right wing, because she said before that like socialism is like a cargo cult for like mediocre losers or something along those lines, right?
Oh man, I'm actually seeing this now. Yeah.
Well, okay, so sorry,
the luxury beliefs, which is such a projection.
Mm-hmm.
Right, such a projection because it's like the billionaires.
Exactly.
They're the ones who had the luxury to believe in their like narcissistic worldview.
Exactly.
Like,
believing that you're not going to die is the ultimate luxury belief. Like, are you kidding me?
Right,
right. Like that's beyond.
But here's something that's like a little strange, because I clocked it like the other day. There were some articles that were coming out about fundraisers that Zoran Mamdani was having in like for his to like fund his like transition effort. And of course, there's some that were like trying to take shots at him. He's like, oh, he's taking money from the billionaires now. But I do feel obliged to pay attention to these things, right? Like when we have a hot new socialist person with a populist campaign that wins and is popular and everything. So one thing I noticed is that one of the people throwing a fundraising party for him was Mike Novogratz. Are you familiar with that name? So he's like a crypto like tech guy who is also really big into like psychedelics and is, I think he is invested in Compass Pathways along with the Jurvetsons and Peter Thiel and all this other stuff, which I think that like he might be doing a thing where like I'm gonna try to like get on his good side, and then like make sure he's friendly to whatever psychedelic or crypto stuff that I'm like kind of involved in, right? But it's funny that on some level they're like part of the same network. I think they're both on the board of something, or they both support something called the Audacious Project, which I don't know if it's exactly psychedelic, but it's a kind of, I'm just looking at their website, but it's kind of one of these like TED adjacent, like futurist kind of conferences about social impact. But given the people that are like on it, I think there's probably a lot of psychedelics enthusiasts. And so I wonder, like, are they even going to are they going to do like a cynical pivot? Maybe if there is going to be like a little bit of a backlash against a lot of this AI stuff in Silicon Valley, and these people just being like openly techno-fascist and all this stuff, like, are they then going to try to pivot back to being like, actually, we're leftists, like a little bit, like a little, or at least send some of their emissaries to like curry favor, make sure they're not going to lose like the next generation of Democrats or even Democratic socialists? Because I have to say, like, I could easily see a kind of like that sort of DSA, Democratic Socialist, still working within the Democratic Party, kind of New York kind of people. I could see them be convinced that this is actually still fundamentally left-wing. Like maybe some right-wing people got involved, but like kind of bringing it back to the Hamilton cover story of like, this is hecking leftist fundamentally. and maybe try to modulate or play both sides. What do you have you seen any other like indications of maybe a kind of modulation to try to like still curry favor on the left
amongst like psychedelic like philanthropists and like those kinds of people?
Yeah,
I haven't seen a lot of that. It's not that it would make sense like what you're saying. There's going to be a shift in the sentiment, and so putting all of their eggs in one basket like doesn't necessarily make sense unless they're just so convinced that it's going to work and they're not going to need to, because there is that side of the Peter Thiel orbit. It's like we're not going to need to have elections anymore. It's like if they manage to install Palantir fascism, like they might not need to hedge in that case. But I just haven't seen a lot of the discourse is just on the more right side recently.
Yeah, it's definitely
another dimension of it is that like this is the thing about the American right in general, I feel like, is that a lot of them are able to like represent their politics as non-politics. Like, and this is also a similarity with Stuart Brand, who described the Whole Earth Catalog as having no politics and things like that, right? When of course like it did have like a subliminal politics that was like quite, I guess it was subliminal, it wasn't explicitly stated, but it was still fairly apparent, right, that it had kind of this libertarian, almost like Randian politics to it, which I think is somewhat true of like, for even Bryan Johnson's live stream, you have all these people together who like, we got Hamilton here, like he is like one of these like leftist guys. He was just hanging out with the great leftists, Andrew Callahan and stuff like that, it's like, but we have these people, I have, it's kind of like this kind of a constant shibboleth of like, I have friends who support Trump. I have friends who support the like I'm not like that, whereas like I'm not like this cancel culture or whatever, but of course like they do have like very fierce, like really right-wing politics, but it's this weird phenomenon on the right where they like, in American discourse, for whatever reason, like far right is like still seen as like kind of like a slur, I guess. I may be going back to a different political paradigm, like where people will kind of get their hackles up if they're called far right, even if they like absolutely are, and they see it as like, how dare you like call me far right? It's like, well, like why are you ashamed of your politics? Like this is like what you believe, but it is this weird thing where like I guess it's kind of a holdover from the sort of a shrinking marginality, or the shrinking kind of or the holdover from a time when the right was more marginal, where you like we have seen a massive transformation even for like within my lifetime, like things like open like racism, like flagrant xenophobia, like just like the idea that like America should just exclude other groups on the basis of race or religion. That's something that is totally transformed in my lifetime, is like within like the sort of Overton window of acceptable discourse. But that's like exactly how they've done it, is they've represented this as being like, this is not far right, this is just like normal apolitical common sense, just like saving the veterans no matter how we have to do it.
100%. I mean, this week I was like saw clips of like Asmongold doing exactly that, like the most like Nazi dehumanizing like statements about Black people in this country and other topics, and then when you say, oh, those are Nazi things to say, he is like faux offended, or kind of like has that the exact response that you're describing, where it's like the label is seen as like offensive even though it's accurate.
Yeah, they do that all the time. It almost
it's funny, like a lot of them will like openly support Franco, or like a slightly less controversial fascist, but then if you say like, oh well, you're like a Nazi, then they'll get upset just because it's part of this kind of like American civic religion, or has been, that like Hitler is bad, and but they really obviously, like if you really force them to
It kind of puts something in a different light that when I was reading through one of those books about Stuart Brand and the Well in the 80s, one of the first really like social networks. That was where this thing was invented I think it was called Godwin's Law. That like this is kind of like a popular meme and like early
like
internet.
In internet arguments, Hitler will always come up.
Inevitably, like Hitler will be invoked in like a forum argument, and that will sort of like terminate the conversation, like the debate, and just kind of like kill it. And I remember years ago, this is kind of before the rise of the alt-right, but people would always like bring that up if you called anybody a Nazi. And I mean, you could see it kind of like it became this stupid meme that actually like isn't. It's like, okay, haha, funny. Like, yes, when people are fighting one might call the other Hitler at some point. Okay, funny little observation. But the idea is like, oh, there actually are Nazis on the internet. There always have been. There have been fascists on the internet. There have been, crazy eugenicist, like people with not hierarchical, authoritarian right-wing ideas and racist ideas and stuff like that. So it kind of like brushes it aside, like it's not significant. And now we see like kind of like they have that same impulse. The right wing people, if you call them Hitler, be like, Godwin's law, like, oh, you're owned because you called somebody Hitler, and it's like you're literally praising Hitler. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to call you.
It's also like a failure. It's like a failure to appreciate that, like, they are, like, have the politics, like, that are in alignment with. It's kind of like how, like, people like Zohran Mamdani will be called a communist or something, when, like, of course he's not in any way.
Right.
And, or so, he'll be called a jihadist or something because, like, simply because he's Muslim and because he's brown, and it's like, this is obviously, like, polemical, but like they'll do that constantly. But if you say like you're a Nazi for like being, racist, being like xenophobic, being like reactionary, then like that's, absurd. But yeah, it's kind of like, yeah. Anyway, but it is kind of a interesting how like, yeah, it has it's part of this whole like a broader thing, and in a way like. The ideological dynamics of it are interesting. The way that like it kind of is used both to sort of like progressive wash like these like really like perfidious ideas, and also to kind of like left wash the psychedelic movement, which of course like is really has increasingly become like anything but, and is like this like a very dark vision of the future, really like a vision of kind of like a transhumanist aristocracy, like just ruling over us with an iron fist, and everyone else being anesthetized while they're having visions of godhood or something.
Yeah. Well, just before we move on from one thing I wanted to mention about Hamilton and Genevieve on the Bryan Johnson stream is someone had told me, I'm not on Hamilton's Patreon, but evidently there was some podcast he did where the previous podcast, he was talking about how Psymposia should focus on like real problems, like, the longevity people, as like they should go after them. And then the next podcast, he said right after that happened, he got contacted by Bryan Johnson. And then when he heard about like Genevieve and everything, he was like, what appealed to him so much about it was like doing it to upset Psymposia from his perspective of like, on Blue Sky, people referred to it as like a nightmare blunt rotation. I saw that come up like quite a few times.
It really was. It certainly was. That's funny though. So that's how he's explaining it, that he just stumbled upon Genevieve Jurvetson via getting invited randomly on Bryan Johnson's.
No, well, he didn't. No, they knew each other already. He's like posted pictures and stuff of them. But in terms of like going, in terms of Bryan Johnson, like I think like they reached out to him and asked him to do that. But it kind of goes to show how like he doesn't really stand by a lot of the stuff he says. He just he likes to score points and to win, and that kind of drives a lot of it, more so than like consistency or like a grounding in the evidence and that kind of thing.
Sorry, keep going. Yeah. Oh,
no, you go.
I honestly was surprised that he didn't bring you up like during the. I almost expect like, because there were a couple like questions where it almost seemed like they were trying to like get get him an opportunity
What's
to do it.
What's standing in the way of legalized psychedelic therapy? In your view?
Exactly. There were a lot of like kind of like leading questions, but he did demur a bit. I mean, the standout moment to me with him and Genevieve Jurvetson was that Genevieve Jurvetson went on this kind of ecstatic kind of, I think that this was all kind of planned in advance, but there was a moment where like Ashley Vance was interviewing them, who's like this kind of like a state media guy, like he's like Elon's like like an Elon toady, who like wrote this like a book that doesn't say like a negative word about him, that's like less even more intensely hagiographical than that John Markov book. But
who was also at the Epstein like Edge dinner with Jurvetson in 2001. By the way, I found his photo at the Edge Foundation website. John Markov, nice. Who wrote Stuart Brand's biography, used to go to the Edge Millionaires dinner.
Of course. But yes, so he Vance asked like what are you most hopeful about in the psychedelic space, and and Genevieve Jurvetson went this kind of like a rapturous thing about how, you know, the potential of this administration in particular, and, you know, how like this is going to be great.
We're
going
just
to
waiting
get like,
on the White House. They have HHS on board.
Secretary Kennedy. Secretary Kennedy is ready to rock and roll. She said something like that.
Yes. And Hamilton kind of had to give like a slight like loyalty oath. He had to bend the knee somewhat, where they said like, well, what about you, Hamilton? Are you optimistic? Do you share this optimism? And he's like, I'm certainly hopeful. It's like, well, you know, I mean, that's probably the most, I mean, I guess he could have said I hope or something rather than saying I'm hopeful, because that implies, I guess, that he is optimistic. But I mean, he does strike me as someone who, you know, this is the only important thing to him, and he will do anything in order to accomplish, you know, his vision of this. You know, he's a difficult person to understand at times, but yeah.
One track mind,
yeah. Well, one of the things that I've just found really interesting and like kind of watching the discourse is how much, you know, a lot of his messaging around Psymposia, and also me in particular, it seems very much designed to kind of like dehumanize, discredit, and like ostracize us. And I think part of the reason for that is because we actually have the capacity to explain things in a way that can change people's minds. And it's like they want us to be a third rail, because if people assume that they know what we're saying, they won't stick around to find out what's beyond their pre-existing assumptions. And I've seen this over and over again this semester. Like I got a lot of invitations to, you know, go speak around the world, and every location I went to this year, when I actually had a chance to explain myself and explain my analysis and the concerns, where like people could say, but what about, and I could respond to that and clarify how my position is not what they're expecting it to be, people can understand me. And that's a huge threat to that entire side of the field.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole like the discursive quality of that live stream, like, you know, his experience, like his trip didn't speak for itself. This really was like an opportunity for these people to propagandize the audience. Like that really was like the whole like like it was just like, okay,
he's in the sleeping bag with headphones on, listening to music, and then Genevieve Jurvetson and Hamilton were basically talking about, you know, all this other psychedelic stuff.
They had like panels basically while like he's like in the corner, like, you know, picture to picture with the sleep mask on.
And I think he mentioned, I didn't realize this at first, but it was done in a specific legal psychedelic therapy setting that had very specific rules around it. Did you happen to know, Neşe, like if he was doing it in partnership with like one of these companies that has some kind of legal outlet? Because he kept stressing that what he's doing is legal, but he like couldn't go outside. He had to do it in this like room studio, and like he, you know, he couldn't use freshly squeezed juice. He had to buy it from the store because that's like part of the legal thing that's been approved or something like that. Did you know who like was he involved with an org or a company?
I think there was a doctor that was thanked, I think, on his like the YouTube live stream. I think there's like a pinned comment or something that says like, thank you to Dr. so and so. I forget the name.
Yeah, there's this guy like Seeger at right? Yeah, it was like I forget what, but he was like trained in the MAPS therapy, I believe. Like they mentioned that specifically. Right? Yeah.
So this is very much also an exhibition of the exact type of psychedelic assisted therapy,
the preferred version of psychedelic therapy of this group that they're trying to normalize and act like this is the way, this is to associate in people's minds with psychedelic therapy, but it's a specific idea for what this is.
It's very specific.
It was Dr. Carl Seeger, who I guess is someone who is like both in the psychedelic thing and like kind of has the sort of, I think he has the MAPS training, at least that's what they said in the live stream, and he is also like really big into the longevity stuff and like you know, so that's I guess was kind of the person who was like on there to oversee it. You know, he came in on like first of all, and then he was there at the end. So
But there was another doctor thanked in that was not that same person.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, even in like Maryland, where I live currently, there's there was just a task force report that was put out that first there was a group, they had lobbied to get a task force in the state to research psychedelic access models and determine what would be best. And you could see in the in the actual like law establishing the task force that it was already PSFC, because the way they like described what they were interested in aligns with the preferred PSFC model. And then lo and behold, the task force just published this long report after having interviewed a bunch of people with ties to PSFC that like, oh yes, in fact, Maryland can't wait for the FDA. We must rush ahead with this particular version of psychedelic therapy that PSFC is heavily invested in. So it's like, it's very much trying to normalize it. And in there, so the PSFC had like an earlier landscape report, but then they more recently, after the FDA rejected MDMA, put out a new roadmap, and they fully emphasized that a huge priority for them is like regaining control of the narrative. So it's like they don't want to hear about any ethical concerns with like the way that they're going about doing things. They want to just ensure that people like us can't cause problems for them in the future by aligning with, you know, film people who are making movies to have like preferred storylines and to actually like broadcast and get this out to normalize it, the specific version of it.
Right. Full court press, flood the zone with all kinds of, and they have, you know, such a pole position when it comes to new media YouTube content with all these different kind of like non-political podcasters that have massive followings that I think they can enlist and have enlisted to normalize this, and like little, you know, fun new media stunts like this that just make it seem like cuddly and like, you know, like not as specific as it is, like just like, well, you know, a bunch of serious scientists must have come up with this because it looks so professional. And, you know, they definitely downplay like the right-wing political beliefs of a lot of the people bankrolling it, and just their general like weird pretensions and obsessions with like ruling the world, living forever, dominating all of us in like an MK Ultra like hellscape, like, you know, Aldous Huxley's like painless concentration camp of the future, which I think I brought up last time. It's crazy. Now, actually, speaking of the PSFC, Neşe, what do you know kind of what their moves are right now since the MDMA FDA thing didn't get approved? Have they sort of circled their wagons and picked the next thing to target?
Well, like I think Genevieve said in that live stream, she says they're like turning away from, they're less focused on funding research and more on funding access. So like put like even recently I saw they're like, there's a Germany now has a expanded access sort of program for psychedelics, and they're funding for international like donations to help get people to that program, to like, you know, show how good it is and to like support people to go through it. Same thing they're doing. They're like in that roadmap I mentioned, they talked about the fact that Colorado and Oregon are not successful money-making programs. And so the way of dealing with that is, well, how about we fly in people from out of state to like kind of prop up this initiative. So it's like they're trying to plug people in to the existing programs that they've managed to open. And then, you know, the FDA is still a priority for them to kind of get this approved, whether psilocybin or MDMA, both, I mean, they're trying for both of them. And then the narrative control that I mentioned, that they want to work with influencers and to get this particular version of the narrative out there.
Mm-hmm.
I looked. It was Tracy Townsend who he thanks in the comments.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just to clarify.
One more thing about the live stream. Did any of you notice where was Mr. Beast?
Oh, I didn't realize.
I don't
Mr.
think he
Beast
showed
was
up.
To be in it.
He was advertised as being.
He was on the flyer.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know, Mr. Beast just what I thought was especially kind of funny about the timing of that is like Mr. Beast just announced some kind of partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation to like turbocharge the philanthropy through Mr. Beast challenges or something like that. And which is like already Mr. Beast, like his vague sinister vibe was already enough without Rockefeller backing. But, you know, the Rockefellers is something I've been aware of for a while, that like, you know, Dr. Richard Rockefeller is probably the best example, but like the Rockefeller family in general is pretty like into the psychedelic thing. And they're pretty still like people are funding it, you know, and He was a huge supporter of MAPS. He died in a plane crash, I think, in 2013. But other members of his family are like very enthusiastic, you know, the ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD, you name it, and are still supporting this. So it was like funny then immediately Mr. Beast, who was like a content creator for kids, is going on the mushroom live stream, which is like, you know, I mean, I know he doesn't have the most ethical reputation, but it's like a little bit like, oh, is Mr. Beast gonna be on to like make kids think this is like cool, you know, because all the 12-year-olds watching are like obsessed with him. But then, I mean, he didn't, I don't know why, maybe he thought it was like a little too spicy, a little too 18 plus for like to show up on it. It wasn't explained, I don't think, at any time. I don't think they said why he wasn't on.
I didn't watch the very end, so I don't know who. I think I watched like the first like 5 hours just on the background. It wasn't like when I was doing other things. It wasn't like
I did like the skim. I skimmed through the thumbnail through the whole thing.
I skipped over Grimes' DJ set. I didn't listen to that.
Talk about difficult. That was it was a strange DJ set. But but you could see it. It's just like a marketing exhibition for like this type of therapy and mixing it with the kind of longevity maxing kind of. I mean, really, Bryan Johnson, he was the creator of Venmo, right? Like he made a lot of money on Silicon Valley, right?
Did he create Venmo?
Or he was one of the people that started Venmo.
Oh, he was the CEO of Braintree. Mobile and web payment systems, and an acquired Venmo, and the combined entity was acquired by PayPal for $800 million in 2013.
Interesting.
So
yeah. So I mean, he seems like he's been selected to be like the guy to go out and be the face of some of this new transhumanist some of these new transhumanist ideas. And kind of make it like a fun, like, ooh, I'm experimenting on myself, and it's so goofy. And
right, it's like shocking and crazy, like especially with like the "my son is my blood boy" thing that he first like became prominent for. It was like taking his son's blood and injecting it into himself, which was like an idea that was like, you know, awful. I mean, you really can see like how like the, you know, the kind of like narrative of him as this like great psychedelic ambassador is even like kind of like, I mean, that is something that is people like, what, you're taking your son's blood and injecting it in yourself in order to like try to prolong your life? That is like sus. But now it's kind of like, oh, well, you know, he's actually trying to promote magic mushrooms, and it's beautiful.
I think somebody in the live stream, I think, brought up an example of like in a mice experiment, they extracted the blood of, I think it was like young mice that had taken psilocybin and then injected it into older mice, and it made them like younger or like arrested their aging or something. I think literally a doctor just kind of threw that out there, I think, in like the earlier part of the live stream.
Well, like it's it's very like, honestly, like they basically like reverse engineered like adrenochrome conspiracy theories, like literally, because like they're talking about how like this is like longevity because like it lets you have like the connectivity in your brain of a child. They were also saying that, but then it's like, okay, like whatever, like it helps your mental health, and if you're mentally healthy or something, then like, okay, that's, you'll live like a couple years longer maybe, but like no, like that's not the end of it. It's also like creating new children with psychedelics and then taking their blood and injecting it into yourself. All right, interesting. I'm on Tracy Townsend's website right now. She actually has the "If you die before you die" Mount Athos inscription that you talked about in she has that at the top of her Healing Ethos about page.
Wow.
It's the very first thing. And then the second one is from The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. All significant breakthroughs are break withs old ways of thinking.
Of course.
Yes, yeah.
Radical breakthroughs, as Jeffrey Epstein would say.
Yeah, this is funny. All right, so she has the paradigm shift. The old paradigm, mind-body dualism, and the new paradigm, mind-body unity. Old paradigm, human as machine. New paradigm, human as quantum computer. Still a machine, but okay. Old paradigm, physical symptom driven. New paradigm, psycho-spiritual lens. Old paradigm, Western allopathic dominant. New paradigm, fully integrated Eastern, Western, and indigenous. All right. I don't know if that's the case, but excels in acute genetic-based conditions. That's the old paradigm. Excels in chronic lifestyle behavior-based conditions. The new paradigm, and then the old paradigm is paternalistic model, and the new paradigm is inner healer model. Pretty, yeah, very, very interesting. It's a bunch of it's like a bunch of pablum here.
Yeah, I'm glad they figured all that out.
Death is not to be conquered but befriended. Yeah, death is not to be conquered but befriended. But I guess Bryan Johnson didn't read that part of the website. Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot of like just straight up pseudoscience that is just kind of like covered up by people who say, oh, it's indigenous, and so that way we can, it's a good thing that it's here. And part of the issue is that there's not a lot of like literacy in general in society right now, and then especially like science literacy and understanding that like data individual experiences are not like persuasive data in the context of like generating an evidence base for something. Like people don't really have that context, and so when people like me try to explain that the MAPS therapy is inherently pseudoscientific in a way that like reinforces true believers' confidence in the methodology, people don't even understand like what I'm saying. They don't have the like framework for that, and that's part of why I think it took me kind of getting in the room with some people to actually like lay it all out and explain and get past people's assumptions, because a lot of people have assumptions about these concepts that they kind of like aren't able to really hear what we've been saying. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. There is this kind of like flexibility in terms of the discourse that's like instrumentalized. Like on one hand, like they use like science and kind of the like scientism and like the reverence people have for the idea of science as like objective to like, create the effect that you're saying, where it's like, well, how can you say that? Because actually this is scientific, and like what's scientific doesn't have anything to do with like belief or metaphysics or like these, kind of contingent ideas. It's all like what's completely objective and empirical. And like there's, lack of understanding of that. But also, of course, they like marshal other things as well. Like whatever's going to work on a given audience, whether it's like the vets thing or something else, like real, it's the only common denominator is like that we got to get this drug to make it available to people like by any means necessary. And I mean, I guess really part and parcel, but it doesn't actually, it's not actually independent of like how they want to present it and how they want to use it.
They're presenting it as a neutral tool, the way maybe Stuart Brand would, of it's just a tool. And but as they all love to say, like, we make tools and then we mold ourselves to the uses of them. But I mean, that's kind of a scary like credo to live by when you're talking about psychedelics, which can mold you like in kind of like intense ways, so it's like just being like, I'm gonna let the acid, like this non-agent, like I don't know, it's like a non-agentic agent that is gonna mold me to the uses of it. It's still like I don't know, it feels like you're giving up something of like yourself and your own will to like decide for yourself how to mold yourself or your own experiences with it. But they're kind of telling you just to like let the quote unquote drug do the driving, but it's actually not even the drug. Like in this therapeutic context, it's their set and setting, like their power of the set and setting, right? That has a huge role in like determining how the tool shapes you, right?
That's the nuance. It's like not understood. It's like, they're like, you're being attacked. It's like, you oppose like all like, medical, like you're like so anti-capitalist that like you just like hate, or like you're, prohibitionist in some way. But like really like the main object of your critique is like this therapy and like this, kind of complex around this.
Yeah. Well, because the whole MAPS therapy, like we're describing it euphemistically, like as I mentioned in my submission to the FDA, like they use terms to make it, to give an outsider who didn't know what they were actually doing a false impression of their therapy. So it's like they described it as non-directive, which made people think that they were just kind of like a trip sitter that is sitting there and just kind of like supporting as needed, of like getting you water or blanket or something like that. But it was actually a completely different idea, this like inner healer concept that came up there, the inner healing intelligence that comes from Grof. The idea is that you're when you're in this holotropic or psychedelic state, when your ego defenses are less active and kind of subdued, then all of this inner trauma that you've collected in your body over your lifetime, leading all the way back to birth trauma, is just going to start pouring out and expressing itself. And they teach the therapist that they can telepathically attune to what is trying to emerge from the individual who is being treated, and to use touch to like reenact trauma to help it express itself so that it can be released. And they do that because I've read a lot of descriptions of people who are working in this this methodology, and they'll say that you can kind of cultivate this capacity to discern, to like feel that inner agency and what it's trying to express. But there are so many examples where in that context of true belief that these therapists are operating in, they can generate a feeling of external agency that is actually just their own projections, assumptions, and even biases. So it's as I write in some of my work, their therapy is a vector for bias, because it's one thing for rich people to be pampered in this like rich context with therapists and have all the resources afterwards to put their lives in place. But if there are privileged facilitators working with like inner city Baltimore people with PTSD, then their judgment call, their vibe read of the person might be like, oh, you have something demonic in you, or there's something you're resisting, when really it's actually just difference. I just think they're different from you. And so it's like that's part of why it was we felt important to like let people know, so that people could make more informed choices instead of being lulled into, as you were saying, like Dimitri, like giving up their own agency and actually making their own decisions. And just kind of like it reminds me honestly of like vampires, like how coming to your house and like how you have to invite them in. They're like tricking people to identify with this parasitic kind of project of these very wealthy people, and to get on board with that and allow that into their hearts and minds.
Right. Talk about a setting with like no guardrails for potential abuse. Like it sounds ripe for that, like by design. Like you're putting somebody in such a powerful position, even though they're a facilitator, or but it's kind of like you're putting them in like a guru position. If you're gonna force them, also the requirement on you need to dredge out all your worst traumas now. You're on MDMA, and it's like whoa. You know what I mean? Like that's one paradigm of approaching MDMA use. But I feel like it's not the only one. But they're kind of acting like this is the one specific way you have to. It's actually the most responsible way to do it. When, like, I've always said that it's like doing ecstasy with like your best friends and like going to a rave with people that you feel safe with and trust is probably like way less ripe for abuse than whatever the hell these people are doing. But it's gotten flipped on its head, where like, oh no, you don't know about that. That could be sus. But like, they
pathologize the horizontal models of like taking it with your own community. That's the dangerous thing for them.
That has to be criminalized.
And so they don't like force people into their traumas, but the entire construct of like, you have this kind of suggestibility enhancing agent of the drug in a context of true belief, where the facilitators really believe that this approach of like exercising trauma is what is therapeutically helpful. You are creating a condition where people, like, there's a big problem now, a big debate about like recovered memories of abuse that don't end up
of course, yes.
And so it's like when you're in that context of a power imbalance where you're told you have to defer to the experts strongly believe in this particular vision of psychedelic therapy, people will have experiences that conform to the expectations of the facilitators. And this has been known in psychedelic therapy all the way back to early 20th century, where people were saying that isn't it interesting that psychedelic therapists that are Freudian have patients with Freudian experiences, and Jungians have patients with Jungian experiences. Like, there's so little awareness of that role in shaping the experiences that people are having. And so what happens is that there's this like feedback loop where people like Grof, after hundreds and thousands of sessions, he's like, I've really hit upon this model of the psyche because I can tell from all of these many experiences that my model is true without realizing that it is a feedback loop. It is like his expectations, his priming, his context, lo and behold, producing experiences that conform to that. And then people get caught in this true belief where they're unable to look at the situation differently. So it's like this phenomenon is known to science, and for some reason, for us raising this as like, hey, maybe we should be attentive to these dynamics, like we're represented as the problem here.
Yeah. I mean, what it really is like a contest or like a sort of a clash of like two like discourses, like where they are like very protective of like their official line, and they want to make sure that like this is interpreted in one way, and even that the drug is like experienced in one way, or the like the use of this and like what it means, like how it is useful is understood in one way, and like which is their way. And like for like by departing from that and like in any way, or like even saying that like this could potentially be understood different ways, like that is like a threat. I mean, like in terms of what you're saying, I think that the best example in the testimony you gave to the FDA was when you talked about how Rick Doblin had described Megan Boyson as being ungrateful for all that like they had done, and that actually this has been a good, positive experience. But like and so she like that was not he wasn't grateful enough for it, and that's really the problem was that she wasn't putting it in the right perspective or something. So I guess it's kind of the it goes both ways in a way where it's like even if someone is like recounting the experience in a particular way as traumatic or as abusive, that even that doesn't count. Like it doesn't, what they experience doesn't matter. It's only what how you perceive it to be, or like that trumps everything.
Yeah, well, that specific quote I think was like secondhand published in magazine, but like I could very much see Rick Doblin saying something like that. And in part because like the whole like part of what I was trying to contribute with this therapy cult analysis is like a discourse analysis of the ways that like true belief in pseudoscience can interpret any outcome as confirmation of the prior assumptions. So it's like there's the way that the true believers look at the situation. It's like if someone, like you were just saying, if someone ends up upset afterwards, they were resisting. They weren't grateful enough. That's actually the part of them that is resistant to healing, that is having a problem with this happening.
Right.
And
yes.
Ultimately, I mean, that type of abuse happened to me. That's part of why in the underground, that's part of why I have been interested in this, because I, in my situation, I had a mentor, father figure, sort of like very close to me, who, told me he wanted to like help my back pain in a session with him, and he was going to do body work like for my back pain. And then he assaulted me. And then when I afterwards was like, what just happened? What did you do? He said to me that he did it for me. And the fact that I had a problem with it showed that I wasn't as much of an expert in psychedelics as he thought. And that's a direct quotation. So that is a recurring pattern in this field, where you have like, because it's vibes based and the people with charismatic authority are the experts, then you end up with a system where people who are powerful get to say that their base instincts and whatever else that they're projecting on their vulnerable clients, like that's the truth, that's what's good for you, that's what helps you heal. Like all the examples in our report where having sex with a therapist was going to cure their cancer, stuff like that. It's a recurring theme. And just like look at the way, like you mentioned how Megan was treated after the phase 2 MDMA clinical trial abuse, but like what I've been through this past year, it's like all I was doing was like taking her really seriously and saying like, hey, I think there's something here that we should be looking more closely at. And it's like they've been treating me the same way that they treated her, as this like threat to the movement. And it's like so many of the narratives that have been circulating about me are just like completely false. Like it's almost humorous to me. It's just like, where do they come up with this stuff? It's like I actually have been working in harm reduction, like beyond the psychedelic field. And like people are like, oh, Neşe is trying to uphold the war on drugs, when like my broader work outside of psychedelics is all about getting, beyond the war on drugs and beyond this prohibitionist like paradigm. So
right.
But one thing I did want to like touch on, was just like the way that I'm very interested in I'm just a kind of comparative thinker, like with the AI and psychedelic discourse parallels. So there's a lot of like zeitgeist stuff going on right now in like the online world, and especially like the online left, where people who I'm a big follower of like Hassan Piker. I've been watching him for probably like 5 years now, and I've been really interested in that. There's like parallels between Hassan and Psymposia in terms of like our role in our respective communities. Psychedelics is like a much smaller world, but in the sense that he's kind of been like 10 toes down for like Palestine and stuff, and like really trying to stay focused and on message in the context of these like broader attacks against him and his reputation. And there are people on the right who are seeing how how Hassan is kind of like me in the sense that people can listen to him and start to understand the like leftist perspective on things, who might not have originally been open to leftist ideas. And so there's been an interesting parallel of like the ways that when like I was talking to you briefly before we got on streaming, the situation with the Kaya's like supposed shot caller, where there was this like clipped video of his dog yelping, and kind of there's this narrative that was pushed of like, he's such a terrible person, he's a monster, he's like trying to control his dog, like where it can be in the frame. And it got to be such a huge like talking point online. And it turns out that it was like advanced by Destiny's community, which is kind of parallel to what's been happening with Hamilton Morris's community, in the sense that like they have acknowledged like we knew that this was like, we could use this against him. And people who don't have a broader context for Hassan, who saw that, became completely convinced that he was this terrible person and that he abuses his dog. Similar thing has been happening with me, where people take aspects of my FDA testimony that have a completely valid, explainable reason for it, but they selectively frame it in a way that makes me look monstrous and terrible. And the end result is to discourage people from taking me seriously and looking further into the ideas that I'm trying to communicate. And so it's like that inability to, it's like been so hard for us to kind of connect at Psymposia with the broader left, which I think would understand where we're coming from, unlike the far right reactionary psychedelic movement that has been kind of like taking the reins of this field. But because the newspapers are so controlled by the types of people that like put hit pieces against Psymposia, like at like Wired and New York Times. Yeah, it's hard for people to understand what's actually going on, and so they just assume that this is like a positive development against the war on drugs, and they're not aware of how. Like I think our natural allies are on the left, and the left is not aware of what's happening in psychedelics right now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've been subject to some of the same things. Unfortunately, mostly from Hassan's friends. But on the other hand, I do see I think another parallel is that I'm not as familiar with the Destiny angle, but I have kind of seen a little bit of the Ethan Klein, feud with Hassan, and I did definitely notice that because Ethan, it is interesting that they ended up targeting women and femmes, that was who it ended up getting sued and getting entrapped by all that thing. They ended up having to read that please execute me hostage video, that. It's truly the vindictiveness. It's truly insane. So obviously, that and over the issue of Palestine, which of course we all know the where the psychedelic community at large, or the people who we're talking about, where they stand on the issue of Gaza and Palestine.
That's been a vibe shift as well to see. I think maybe it's a little more clearer post 2023 to see where a lot of these people in the tech world and in the psychedelic space land on the Gaza issue, and in a lot of cases not as enlightened as maybe I think you the one would think with all the enlightening psychedelic experiences they have. They're even Rick Doblin had collaborations with the former chief psychiatrist of the IDF, and was speaking, this is some years ago, but I think he was speaking about well, if we could just get Israelis and Palestinians do MDMA together, then they'll understand that having their land stolen is like not a big deal. Like there's a weird, like, if we just have to throw a big enough psytrance rave, then like we don't have to confront the very material, real, like political question of Israel and Palestine, and or even when people are being like genocided, it's like well, you know, like I feel like a lot of people have either retreated or they've been, you know, in the case of the sort of the Peter Thiel people, like enthusiastically in support of it. And, you know, they don't see these two things in conflict at all, which is disturbing. I think one of the Psymposia articles like years ago talked about like, will psychedelics, you know, are they going to make these like affective grease for the war machine? And that's exactly what it looks like they're trying to do. And then using these kind of like brigading tactics to shut down anybody on the internet who, you know, and frame it in this kind of weird way of like, there's this like let people enjoy things kind of impulse that even on the left I think can be like a big problem of just like like stop being critical, like let people enjoy things, you know. Like, you know, psychedelics, like they're great, they've been oppressed by the government in the past, so like let people enjoy. And they don't want to look into like what moves are the powerful making, like where's the money flowing, like where's it coming from, what are the ideologies of the people that have power, and what are they trying to like maybe trick you into supporting that otherwise. Because haven't we all been tricked a little bit by the internet? I feel like we have to admit it, right? 15 years ago in the Great Recession, remember like the average optimism levels among like certainly the millennial generation that the internet was going to like provide like a net positive for the world. And, you know, it has provided certain positives, but I don't think, you know, when people like this network in Silicon Valley were being exalted and elevated to the status of new billionaire gods and everything, and we were kind of putting all our civilizational hopes on their driving innovation and blah, blah, blah. Like we didn't see if anybody had said at the time, oh, all these people hang out with like a pedophile sex trafficker who's like connected to like the CIA and the Mossad, and they're blackmailing politicians around the world, and they're all transhumanists who want to live forever and maybe enslave us in like an MK Ultra techno, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like you literally would have been looked at as like completely insane, like not serious. Like doesn't matter what evidence you could have brought up at that time, people conceptually could not even like deal with that, you know, especially when they were excited about the internet, you know, and the internet was like the one growth thing in our economy. And it had these new ideologies, these like libertarian cowboy kind of Brandy and John Perry Barlow-esque ideas about the Jeffersonian frontier of the internet. So just it's like a major example, like this is also a frontier of, you know, psychological potentialities. And the same group that gave us the internet, that captured the internet, made billions off the internet, and then wielded that responsibility in terrifying and reckless ways, is now doing the same thing, exact thing with psychedelic drugs and offering it to us. And like, I feel like the least we could do is be vigilant and be like, wait a minute, you just like tricked us into adopting all these things and like cheering for it, that have now threatening to like fuck up our lives and, you know, destroy everything that we care about.
You know, that connects to something else that I wanted to just mention today was that I also mentioned earlier was Taylor Lorenz, who has been really trying to call the left's attention to the issue of like ID verification, which is also connected to Peter Thiel, where there is this like feel-good cover story behind this push to internationally like ensure that people have to use like IDs and age verification to interact with the internet. But the cover story is like, oh, this is to keep, you know, children safe. And so people on the left are like, yeah, we're behind keeping children safe. And so like their radar is not like going off that like there's something to be paying attention to here. And so she has been trying to say like, hey, I am begging the left to pay attention to this. This is the cover story, is not the actual motivation here. And we are giving the keys to the internet to like further surveil and control what it is that we're seeing. And I feel like that's what I've been doing on the psychedelic field, where I am like hoping to connect with the left. And like one of the things, because I think like beyond the cover story of like, oh, this is getting past the war on drugs, and like understanding how this plays into a broader strategy of engineering consent for the billionaires like project for society, there's there's like the, oh yeah, sorry, I completely forgot the next point I was going to say. I'll mention if I remember. It just left my head.
Using the ID verification for data, like more data tracking.
I remember what I was going to say. So it's like and I actually wrote my master's thesis kind of like on this idea, like reading Jacques Derrida. So it's like kind of a specific example of it, but it was about how like power gets to label all of the like the people that are not in the interests of power with a story that looks to other people who are acting not in the interest of power as something to stay away from. And so it's like we end up isolated and separate from each other because they control the news, because they control the media, and people are not seeing the connections between all these different topics. And so like one thing that I hope that people are more able to do in the future is to look for the tactics, because the tactics of crushing people are the same in these different domains. And so it's like that hit piece in the New York Times, people should be able to see that and see how the rhetoric matches the rhetoric about Mamdani. And for people on the left, it should be what's going on over there? Like, why are they doing that against this group? And like trying to build bridges and reaching out. But what I'm seeing so far is that people are kind of accepting that, like, oh, I don't trust that group. That group sounds like sus because this hit piece was in. But it's like there's rhetorical things that you can learn to read to see that these tactics are at play. And that can help, I think, us alert ourselves to the other freedom fighters who are working in different domains.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, I think that is an interesting analogy with the Taylor Lorenz thing, because it is true. Like, on one hand, it's like, yeah, like, you know, certainly like the internet in general and like some of the things on the internet like are certainly like harmful to like young people. So like viscerally, you're like, yeah, objecting to that. But when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, how are they going to verify our ages? They're going to like, you know, have a complete way to like, you know, monitor who is using any website at any given time, and like have this a greater access to like your browsing and like all of your activity. And like you even can see, as I was saying before, like the overlap with like the surveillance sort of the creeping surveillance in general. Like, and this is something that was definitely an interest of Jeffrey Epstein, was recently talking about, like, you know, wearable health devices and implants and things like that, which, you know, biohacking, which a lot of these same people are all very interested in. Like, you know, these are like, you know, oh, you know, your doctor, like whoever, can always have access to, you know, all your medical information because you have like an implant in your brain or something like that. It's like, well, you know, is this just like the last frontier of biopolitics, where like this is just going to be total surveillance of not only everything that you say like in a public forum, but also everything that like you know, every emotional response that you have, every like endocrinal like pulse, every like, you know, like they'll be able to tell like when you're having sex or something like that, you know, because they're monitoring you, you know, that's being logged somewhere or something like that. It's like it's just kind of a weird situation.
And they could control what you see as well. So it's like they're measuring what you're already doing, but then they can like limit, because this is a big reason for a lot of this. It is the way that footage from Palestine has circulated around the world. Like they don't like they didn't like Psymposia having an impact. They didn't like that was causing problems for their project, and so they're trying to find ways to not change their project, but to prevent anything from interrupting what they're trying to do.
Every video of like the carnage in Gaza will be like 21 plus or 25 plus. However old you need to be fully indoctrinated to Zionism, like you won't be able to watch that video.
Upload your driver's license to watch content. Every fix is just another way to like deepen control and surveillance, basically. That's what I feel like every so-called solution or innovation at this point is just to optimize the controlling us aspects of the current system that exists. And
so they're taking like real problems, like there are, you know, there's dangerous content online for kids. That's a real problem. But there are other ways of doing it that are not creating a weapon for like control and surveillance. But that's like that's always like the move, right? They'll say, there's a mental health crisis, so we have to put in this specific version of psychedelic therapy that we get to establish the the contours of. Like that's not there's a third way here that's actually addressing the problem.
Yeah, one of the best ways is what a lot of these rich people do is like, don't let your kid have a smartphone. Like, control your child's like parent your children, control their internet access. Like, that is like a viable thing to do. Like, I mean, the way that like people's attention spans are like being like destroyed, but I mean, you know, but we can also see how like there's you know, it's a double-edged sword. But yeah, I mean,
it almost is. You could see it at scale, creating a kind of like a new knowledge class of people that are kind of slopified by AI and are in a way like semi-literate and like can functionally kind of read, but like not, you know, and then people that like stay away, the people whose parents like keep them away from AI and like make them go through like more traditional education or private schooling or whatever are still going to like have those abilities. And then there'll be like a cast of like, you know, like true literate people. Whereas like in the 20th century, the goal was like just get everybody to read, you know, and like there were countries around the world where that was achieved, and it is possible. But now it's like that's not even really like the goal anymore with these billionaires. Like they're not even going to give mass literacy as a treat. They're going to like gatekeep it. They're going to put it in a gated community and then give you this slop machine that lies to you, like, you know, that's not actually, and then outsource your uncritical thinking faculties and you know, all that stuff. It's pretty
develop the skill to like read long form things, like to patiently read and assess information.
Study sources, like figure out who to trust. I mean, it's like a, you know, that's a process that takes some time if you just kind of believe. Like, I mean, that's why I think we have like teenagers that are just like Nick Fuentes, like that. It's like they're not even like Nazis themselves, but he's just another guy in the space, and he's like, he seems like he has a lot of attention and he yells and blah blah blah. And so people, you know, like a 15-year-old that thinks the Gaza thing is fucked up might just be like, oh yeah, Nick Fuentes thinks it's fucked up too, I'm gonna follow him now. And it's like they don't know anything. Like, you know, there's nobody there to like teach them or be like, hey, wait, like, you know, like there's a broader context to like what he's doing. Maybe you shouldn't trust him so much. But now we're in that that kind of environment that these people have created, where certain, and then, you know, I think the algorithms are rigged to certain degrees, where certain voices that they want, that money is riding on, like get left alone or get actively boosted. And then anybody that steps on something you're not supposed to step on, which I feel like Psymposia absolutely did. It's like stepping on like some kind of landmine connected to a vast like money power octopus, and its plans were it sensed a genuine threat from the way you were framing it. I feel like in smaller versions we've run up against that a few times. It's always interesting to see like what really brings out like the knives and people to come after you versus like what you kind of are permitted to like ambiently to talk about. But I feel like when you're fucking with somebody's money like directly or a narrative they're like, you know, trying to build or whatever,
the true belief element is strong. Like with this, like there is like that. I mean, there are all the dynamics you're talking about, like the parasociality, like the kind of spiritual element. Like people feel like it's very strong. That's really what it is. It's like when people feel that strong kind of like emotional like investment in like a story they've been told or like an experience that they had, like whether it's an experience of like listening to someone and feeling like they're your friend or like whatever, you know, like we can see how that overlaps here for sure. Like,
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you know, you go ahead.
Because this connection of like how like the psychedelic field is very Zionist, like on the whole, and I think that there's like a lot of reasons for that, and you know, because what you were saying is that like people, you know, people who are just raised to believe a certain narrative and to strongly identify with that narrative, and to know people who buy into that project, who you see as like close people who are good people and you trust them, anyone who challenges that frame, it's easier to believe that they're just some bad actor coming in to wreck things than to fundamentally question something that's so connected to your identity and your sense of meaning and worldview. And I think part of the reason is also connected to what we were saying before about the vibes-based therapy, that like if you are kind of like in this mode of like being able to intuitively sense where people are at, then powerful, charismatic people will sense positively, and then people who are trying to like raise a hand and say like, hey, I think there's a problem over here, like their vibes are off, you know, it's like they have some chip on their shoulder. And then it's easy when you add the parasocial steering of like, oh yeah, those people are terrible, to just like jump on that bandwagon and not question it.
I mean, yeah, like it's true. Like, and this is one of the like, you know, I think I forget who, I think it might have been Crypto Cuttlefish who like, or at least that's the formulation of this that, you know, I've heard from Dimitri, which I think is very true, which is that there's a kind of like fossilized like class status that like is expressed in the form of like charisma and of like the way that like one carries oneself and the way one talks. It comes, you know, from just the education one's had, or like the, you know, the way that one's always been treated as like their ideas matter, you know, from when they were very young, and that like becomes expressed as a kind of charisma. And it's like, it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence, for instance, that like, you know, not to keep bringing up Hamilton, but like he's the son of Errol Morris.
Yeah.
Like that's not irrelevant. You know, like the reason why people like respond to him and feel like he's their best friend and that they can trust everything he says is not unconnected to the fact that he is like the son, like their wealthy son of a documentarian, you know, and so you can notice that again and again with these people where they're the scions of these like grand, you know, and the people who like, you know, are either like, you know, like D-class-A people like Dimitri and myself, or true marginalized people, or even more like, you know, sort of shunted aside. And it's like, no, listen to the people, like these people are more trustworthy. Can't you tell? Like, you know, they're so charismatic. Like, it's like, well, it's because, you know, this is expressed.
I remember this being in a thread about like how does the ruling class reproduce itself, and I think the psychedelic like community is such a fascinating window into that question, because just like in the PSFC, what do we see here? We see a lot of like second, third, fourth generation heirs of great American fortunes, right? Alongside these kind of new money tech whiz kid masters of the universe. That's kind of the two groups we're dealing with. We're dealing with like old money, but like boomer, Gen X, millennial old money, which, you know, is kind of less visible in our media, but like it's absolutely there. And what they have, oftentimes like more than the money, is the social capital and the social connections with other powerful people, maybe that do have like $300 billion, or, you know, they went to Hotchkiss with this person, or they went to Phillips Exeter, or, you know, they used to vacation and blah, 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 you know, like Warren Buffett taught them how to swim as a kid, like just things like that. And, you know, I think we see like the Pritzker family is well represented across the psychedelic milieu. I think there was, I didn't know this before, but I noticed the Long Now Foundation was getting funding from something called the Scorpio Rising Fund, which is a like pseudonym for the Nick Pritzker Foundation. And Joby Pritzker, I believe his son, was a PSFC board member, right?
I think there was someone, I forget offhand, because I know there's a Pritzker at MAPS, but I forget if it was also PSFC.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Joby, who's Nick Pritzker's son. Nick Pritzker also at an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who was at all the EDGE conferences for years. So it makes sense that he's based in San Francisco and LA on the West Coast. So it kind of makes sense. But I guess they were, you know, very into that. They've been have an interest in psychedelics, and also in terms of intergenerational things. This is just a factoid I stumbled on late last night that is too good not to share. It's a very brief article from May 2000 on almanacnews.com, but I was not aware of this. But this is called Shimon Peres Breakfast at Buck's in Woodside. It's a very fancy restaurant in Silicon Valley. A private breakfast at Buck's restaurant in Woodside May 4th featured a prominent guest, Shimon Peres, Nobel laureate, former Prime Minister of Israel, and co-founder of the Labor Party of Israel. Mr. Peres, who founded the Peres Center for Peace in Israel, shared his vision with Silicon Valley leaders of how the internet can be used as a force of peace, said Isabel Maxwell, president of ComTouch, a Santa Clara-based email and messaging software company. That's Ghislaine Maxwell's sister. But going on, he discussed practical means of realizing that vision in the Middle East and beyond, said Miss Maxwell, who hosted the breakfast. She was recently appointed a member of the Board of Governors in the Peres Center for Peace. Attending the breakfast were Tim Kugel of Yahoo, Les Vadas of Intel, and Steve Jurvetson of Draper Fisher Jurvetson. This is part of Mr. Perez's private tour of the United States. So just to throw that out there, Steve Jurvetson was pretty close friends with Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, who was a Silicon Valley millionaire in the 90s, along with Christine Maxwell. And one of them was on the board of the Santa Fe Institute starting in the early 90s when Robert Maxwell started funding it before his mysterious death. But I don't know, it brings it back. So that's, back in 2000. And then the proliferation of abusers, the gaslighting, the delusions of power, like so much of the behavior of this network, like Steve Jurvetson got kicked out of his, VC firm for Me Too related things, correct? In 2017, like they have a similar level of entitlement and a capacity to look at people as like NPCs and abuse them, and these delusions of power. So I don't know. Gonna have to look more into that about Steve Jurvetson being like hanging out with Shimon Peres and Ghislaine's sister. This is the height of Epstein's first, run with, making all these famous friends and flying them around the world. And so, it's not just his own little crimes or the crimes of MAPS therapists, but he's kind of connected to the biggest one of them all. And I don't know. I don't know what we do with that. But also Epstein allegedly introduced Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, to a girl, and then they became like, boyfriend and girlfriend in about 2011, 2012. I found another old article talking about that. So Kimball Musk, who's very much, is he also on the PSFC?
He is. I don't know if he's like adjacent to. He's in their kind of social network. Whether he's like a formal dues-paying member, I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, there were rumors that Kimball Musk was able to arrange like a guided tour of the SpaceX factory for Epstein around that time, though he denies it, et cetera, et cetera. And his wife, Christiana, who did the big Burning Man exhibit, is actually, I didn't know this, was the daughter of Sam Wiley. He was an early internet multimillionaire guy who was eventually, I think, charged by the SEC with like massive fraud related to offshore banking in the Caribbean, and lost most of his like fortune in a settlement. And then his daughter ended up marrying Kimball Musk. So, I mean, one thing I see in common between, say, her and the Maxwells is, they came from this very wealthy world, and then their fathers committed great frauds and like lost most of their fortune. And so they had the social capital, right? Remember, like a lot of people have pointed this out with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, that she had the social capital. He had like the raw money, however he got it. But, he was the one that like had the cash. That's what she needed. And she could confer respectability. She could introduce him to the British royal family and all these other people. Robert Maxwell, by the way, allegedly was a, quote, avowed socialist. So just watch out, folks, because sometimes his life did not seem to be that of a socialist at all.
Yeah.
But apparently that's what he would, and I guess maybe in a labor Zionist kind of way, he was a quote unquote socialist, but I don't know. But yeah, that's a type of thing with the social capital and the drive to like stay on top. Like I have to stay on top no matter what. Mm-hmm. And then look what they ended up doing, like horrible things. Right.
It is crazy how many South Africans were on that Bryan Johnson live stream. I did notice that. Like there was so many South Africans.
How many other South Africans were there?
Ashley Vance was born in South Africa.
Oh.
David Friedberg, South Africa.
Oh.
Yeah. What's going on? Like, I mean, it makes sense.
Well,
like I guess in a way.
The latest I read, this might be a rumor, but that the Praxis Society, which is funded by Peter Thiel and probably his friends, is like looking into sort of like moving to one of the provinces of South Africa that has some legal loophole where you could like call a referendum and like secede, so they could build their like libertarian network state kind of like. It's like, oh, you're literally trying to go reoccupy South Africa, like, and do apartheid 2 or something. I don't know. It's probably more complex than that. But
there was some chatter in the psychedelic kind of space about in the Epstein files. There was he had gone to the Alchemist Kitchen, which was part of like the Reality Sandwich kind of evolver, which were Daniel Pinchbeck's it's kind of psychedelic New York City social circle. And I was sexually assaulted by Daniel Pinchbeck, and he was like a known kind of like predator that, you know, when he would roll up to an event, he would kind of like scan the room for like kind of calculating like who was going to be his next. Like you could see it in his eyes, like he was going to kind of have had this predatory air when he walked into rooms. And he's been going around saying that I made up that he assaulted me, and it's another example of how I just make stuff up, but he actually did. So
what a piece of shit!
I mean,
we didn't know. I don't think we knew that when we maybe it was our Palestine series where we talked about him.
That's actually how we heard it, is because you posted about it. I think is where I saw it, that you posted Daniel Pinchbeck's insane like vision for building the third temple in Jerusalem.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
right. A real peacenik.
Like, which is that was like we did like a long like 14 episode series about the history of Palestine, but we opened it talking about that because that was so insane and like evil. I mean, he's a wretched human being. It's quite obvious. Like that's one of the most unhinged things I've ever read.
Yeah, it was like an insane psytrance, like Fantasia, like fantasy about.
It would be like a holographic temple.
The drones, like a drone show.
Yeah, drone show temple.
It was like a Burning Man, like psychedelic art installation that would be superimposed over Masjid al-Aqsa. Like no one wants to go to that. Like no one wants to walk through a hologram of like a triumphalist temple to go pray. Like. Anyway, I mean, I mean that like you can totally see. I mean, if you talking about, you know, power trip and all those things, you can see how like, and this kind of goes to the kind of the you know the gendered angle to some of the backlash that like we see. Like there's totally like this incredibly like predatory strain in like the psychedelic underground, which is, you know, like and also the psychedelic above ground increasingly, you know, but it has especially in this connection with Jeffrey Epstein for sure. So yeah, I mean they're natural friends. I mean like Deepak Chopra, people like that are in the Epstein files, like Rob Doss, all these people, you know. So
Epstein and him went to the Alchemist Kitchen together, I'm pretty sure.
Really?
Right? Yes. Yeah. That exactly. Yes. I remember now. In fact, yeah, didn't we read that? Did we remark on like how like that was odd there that they were at the Alchemist Kitchen? I don't know. Yeah, but
they were like aware of the psychedelic scene, like for sure.
I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe there might be more direct connections. So far, not as many have come out about Jeffrey Epstein being like deliberate, like very targeted, like funding like psychedelic type research, though he has funded groups, like organizations that are interested in that type, like the Edge Foundation, which, you know, has had Rick Doblin and, you know, has been definitely like a supporter of the kind of MAPS milieu for a long time. And I don't know if he ever gave money to the Long Now Foundation, but again, it's kind of like they're kind of like the East Coast, West Coast versions of the same network in a lot of ways. It's all the same people. I was a little disturbed to see that Gavin Newsom gave a talk at the Long Now Foundation back in 2008. And if he's president, he, you know, grows up, like comes from upper class San Francisco, that that type of set, that sort of bourgeoisie of San Francisco, very intimately, you know, familiar with psychedelics and in some cases like funding, you know, various things. I think the Getty family has been, the J. Paul Getty Jr. and Gordon Getty were, you know, big supporters for years. But
I mean, like, and I mean, another thing is that, like, as we were talking about, like, the whole, like, kind of convergence of, like, the sort of fields or, like, the circles that Jeffrey Epstein was in with the world of psychedelics was still, like, you know, incipient for, like, most of his, like, the time when he was active, and even, like, you know, at the very end of his life. Like, we've seen this escalate so much. Like, we've seen, like, and now it's, like, kind of, like, open. Like, I think, like, Psymposia was kind of sensitive to it, like, you know, early on. But now it's like, you know, flagrant, and they like they don't care. They rub it in our faces, you know. Yeah. So it's yeah, like at the like all the things that he was so into, like, you know, like putting chips in people's brains, living forever, like transcending humanity, artificial intelligence, which he was deeply interested in. Like all these things now are part of a complex with psychedelics. Like they're packaged together in this kind of like boutique narrative that like these sort of you know, overlapping cliques have.
It's the whole TESCREAL kind of nexus of like these over like long-termism, like effective altruism, sort of the psychedelic utopianism. Like they heavily overlap. And then like the AI stuff, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, you know, which the Zizians broke away from. I'm pretty sure Epstein funded MIRI, and so did Peter Thiel and all these other people. So yeah, like they're all kind of merging into this like blob of I don't know, of ideologies that are not good. They're not good.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you in particular, Neşe, like in your work have described like really well like what this particular ideology is. You know, like what it is. Like it's not necessarily just like a you know, a blob of like these unrelated things. Like they all kind of converge into like a pretty coherent belief system, even though if you actually like state their ideas explicitly, like it's kind of like what, like at the same time, like it does kind of have a coherence.
Yeah, well, it's ultimately like a supremacist ideology and a kind of a necropolitics of like determining, you know, the eugenics connection, like determining the masses are acceptable sacrifices for some more important mission of like, you know, extending consciousness to the stars or, you know, that sort of thing. So, but ultimately people don't understand how expendable the average person is to the people who think that way, who see regular people as NPCs that are not, you know, that are just proto versions of consciousness that are ready to be expired, you know. And another adjacent topic is medical assistance in dying. There's been like there's parallels with that discourse with like psychedelics too, because people are like, you know, oh, this is good for people to have this choice, and like, yes, in a vacuum, just like psychedelics in a vacuum, I would want people to have access to, but in the specific ways that it's being rolled out, it is like in the absence of care that we could be providing for people, we are coercing. The disability community is like trying to get people's attention and saying like they're being coerced to accept medical assistance in dying. And at a time when like the elites are no longer seeing labor as necessary, our lives are not necessary anymore.
That's the scariest elephant in the room, is that if they get good enough at building these like humanoid robots that can like carry stuff and do a lot of like, you know, the factory work and whatever that's like manual based labor that's not automated yet. I still think maybe it's a little far out, but it's on a horizon for them. They're all investing in it. And it's like, it's almost like it feels like they're racing to make us obsolete so they can kill most of us. Like,
they're very open about it.
It is literally, it is vampiric. Like they want to like take our live forever while we all like, and there is like a huge overlap in terms of what you said, like the assisted dying thing, because like they want to use psychedelics to encourage you to want to die.
Yeah, to like, embrace it. Yeah,
that's exactly. In fact, that
if you die before you die, you won't die.
I said I wouldn't bring him up anymore, but he's a public figure. So Hamilton said that exact thing in this Bryan Johnson live stream, that like these people were even trying to take it away from people who, you know, want to deal with death. You know, like what's the you know, if they have death anxiety, what's the shame of and I'm like, I immediately thought like, okay, they want to give it to people who are like debating whether they want to have their lives terminated or something. And it's like, well, and that also reminded me of something in the Epstein files that we were recently reading.
Right, with Yosha Bach.
Yeah, he was the one who said like, well, you know, we like have some, you know, sometimes it's okay to like, you know, have euthanasia. So like, why not a couple years earlier and stuff? It's like, what? Like that's I had a very strange jump scare where I found a really like interesting Substack I'd never heard before. I think this is like a Tulsa-based author. I want to say his name is like Michael Mason or Mark Mason. But it was all about, this guy has been conducting phone interviews with Gordon Todd Skinner for the last 10 years, and has started a Substack about like all these things he's discovered about his life. But when you go to his first blog, you know how it always or when you subscribe, the blog gives you like a recommendation, and it recommended Yosha Bach's Substack, which I was like, oh no, because he's in the Epstein files talking about eugenics.
and talking about, well, it technically would be fascist to kill most of the population, but if you could do it in a certain, like nice way, it would probably be ideal. But I don't know about fascism. Like he's kind of musing about fascism,
right?
And I wanted, because this author was talking to the victim of Gordon Todd Skinner. I think I saw him on like a local news report or something. Michael Mason is his name. Gordon. I guess you're a little familiar with this case that this all orbits around, with William Leonard Pickard and Gordon Todd Skinner, right, Neşe?
Yeah, it's the missile silo.
The infamous LSD missile silo, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the 1990s, eventually, William Leonard Pickard and one other chemist were like arrested driving with like all the precursor, the chemistry equipment, and got life sentences. But the thing was owned by this mysterious man, Gordon Todd Skinner, who really is kind of like one of these LSD mystery men that has such a weird life. And then also his like wife / girlfriend at the time is much younger. Companion Crystal Cole, who was profiled by Hamilton Morris on Vice, on his Vice show years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very like glowing, like enthusiastic kind of
very
portrayal.
Sympathetic. Kind of fawning profile of her as just this cool chick who got in over her head and all this stuff. But what that whitewashed was the fact that in like 2003, Gordon Todd Skinner, who was a major like LSD and psychedelic dealer, kidnapped like this guy that Crystal Cole had sort of been seeing. What was his name?
Brandon Green.
Mm-hmm. Brandon Green, and took him in a hotel and horribly tortured horrifically tortured him. Like I was disgusted reading the court documents last night.
Is one of like the worst descriptions of torture I've ever encountered. Like it's like really brutal.
Right. All the while injecting him with various like powerful psychedelics for like a week while he was brutal, like physically, sexually torturing him in all these different ways. And the way Crystal Cole tells it in her little glowing profile on Vice with Hamilton is that Gordon Todd Skinner was this big, scary, evil guy, and he forced her to, he kidnapped her too, and she couldn't do anything about it. But then in the telling of the individual who was tortured, she lured him to get kidnapped, and then was participating in it kind of, and taunting him and and being really psychopathic and everything, and then eventually ratted on William Leonard Pickard and the other chemist, to get herself out of being charged with being involved with LSD manufacturing, and then became a psychedelic influencer on YouTube in the early 2010s with a website called NeuroSoup, where it was very kind of, I think it seemed like she hung out a lot with Alex Gray and that kind of the psychedelic artist guy. She had a lot of videos of him at Burning Man, talking and stuff. And I'm not sure, ultimately, it seems like she dropped off the grid at some point and completely stopped doing psychedelic sort of influencer stuff, and now just paints paintings on YouTube.
Yeah, there had been a kind of a concerted effort on forums like Shroomery and stuff, because she was speaking places as well, and people kind of mobilized to let people know this, she was involved in this really horrific torture, and do we really want to support this kind of thing? And so I think that might have contributed to the fact that she kind of left that world a bit behind. It might not have been the only factor, but I definitely saw that playing out on the forums. There was people were aware of that incident.
Right. After, despite Hamilton's best efforts to make her just seem like a cool chick who lived in a rad bunker and it was epic, and maybe some crazy things happened along the way, but it's no, she participated in evil torturing and shit, and then it had lifelong impact on including physical impact on Brandon Green. So he's been speaking out more recently about it. So if anyone's interested, he's kind of come out a bit more openly with the story. But there's a lot of the legal documentations online. I mean, he almost died after he
got out of there and was like found on the side of a highway,
Mm-hmm.
got to the hospital like essentially just in time to kind of like save his life. But it was like a really horrific situation. And I do think that is, a factor in Hamilton's kind of like fixation with us, is that like there were a few early things that we were like, hey, like maybe don't like glorify someone who participated in that kind of torture,
Right.
And kind of like just pointing out how this journalist of psychedelics is now working for a Peter Thiel funded company. Like there's things over the years that we've just pointed to, like we haven't like pursued him and like caused it. But I think he genuinely sees us as like possibly rightfully so, as an existential threat to his platform, because it's like the kind of analysis that we have. My feeling is that he has some skeletons in his closet. It's just kind of like my read of him. And, it's in his interest to make sure that people with the kind of analysis that we do are not listened to in this space.
I think he certainly has some skill. I remember him. Yeah, I remember him specifically taking shots at New York Magazine for talking about like just giving like a slightest glimpse into the closet of Hamilton Morris in that article about his former kind of I guess basically his personal assistant, almost someone who was like doing a lot of the work like for his show, who. Yeah, it seems like Hamilton did not do his proper duty as a friend to him, to say the least. I encourage people to read that article. But to say the least. Like I'd probably put money on maybe a few skeletons being there, given just this track record of like not caring when kind of presenting something in a kind of irresponsible way, whether it's like a person who's done really bad things and you just want to make them look cool, or it's like being kind of one-dimensionally positive about like the way he loves talking about PCP and how cool it is and the guy who made it is so cool and they're best friends, and like, or even talk about a sacred cow, Alexander Shulgin, which like I get why people love Alexander Shulgin that are interested in psychedelics, obviously, right? He's an important historical figure. He kind of rediscovered MDMA. He invented 2CB and all these other things, and was a jolly old man on the circuit who was just doing it for the love of the chemistry and whatever. But like he also had associations that were a little bit like, okay, like he was a member of Bohemian Grove. He was basically a DEA like asset for decades. Like he had some kind of arrangement with the DEA where he would help them and then they wouldn't like bust his lab. And he was never handled with criminal gloves. It was always like he was administratively handled. And I don't know, like I think like Hamilton just became friends with him and Anne Shulgin and really just like worshipped at their feet and all this stuff. But when I was going through this Substack about, the very strange Gordon Todd Skinner, who was kind of like one of the psychedelic underground king of like the Midwest, like in the kind of 80s and 90s, and like a strange, like wealthy background, like a wealthy bad kid, like a crazy little kid who, at least if this Substack is to be believed, like was like working for the CIA, like from probably when he like graduated high school. His stepfather was an IRS intelligence agent that his mother married, and then like he was already making drugs in high school. There's like a whole bunch of stuff, but he mentions like a couple things, interesting stories like from jail in this to the journalist, and one of them is like he was really good friends with this guy who tortured somebody almost to death, and was like a rapist and a sicko, like a freak who was always protected. He never went to jail for the LSD missile silo because he was a government informant, right? Everybody knows that. But like and he wasn't just like a scumbag who became an informant. He was a deeper like asset of like the United States government. And he was very good friends with Alexander Shulgin, and Shulgin even took him to Bohemian Grove, and he told a story about it. This would have been in the 90s. They went to Bohemian Grove, where some of the most powerful right-wing people, go to do whatever they do. And he describes this very like eyes wide shut kind of moment where somebody at the Grove like came to them and was like, hey, like Shulgin, like I need your help. And he took him over to some grove where there were two young women who were like
not very well clothed, having a very bad acid trip. And he was like, "You're the psychedelic expert here. Like, can you talk them out of having a bad trip?" And Gordon Todd Skinner describes like him and Shulgin. They eventually like got down in the dirt and rolled around and pretended to be on acid with them because they had experience that that's what really works. Is the kind of role play and then like convince them whatever. But he kind of made a comment like, there were a couple young, beautiful women there, and Bohemian Grove is known as kind of a men's club, so I'm sure they were there because of the men's handsomeness and intellect and blah. Like he's alluding to the fact that these are probably there's some kind of sex worker situation that's always been rumored as a thing that happens. Both young men and young women going up there, even though it's a big boys club. So it's like Alexander Shulgin's like in the rooms of power and everything like that, and probably watching some things that maybe aren't so cool, and to be close to power is like the ultimate temptation, I think, for a lot of these people, even in the psychedelic space, and I don't know, like, so people would maybe get very defensive about Shulgin if you bring that up, but it's kind of like, I don't know, like hanging out with Gordon Todd Skinner, the psychopathic CIA like LSD operative guy. I mean, what do y'all think about that? I don't know.
I mean, he was like a collaborator with the DEA too, wasn't he? As we talked about last time, and
oh yeah. Shulgin was, yeah. They had a relation. They had like a complex relationship, but one that allowed, because they would bring him, I think, street drugs to sort of test and analyze and things like that. But then William Leonard Pickard is also, he was released in 2020, right? And he initially got a life sentence. And now he's on the circuit of psychedelic conferences, and he's very cool with Hamilton Morris. Do you have any, I don't know, do you have any insights into that, Neşe, as to what's kind of going on there?
So I think Hamilton is like, working on some kind of documentary with Leonard, and they kind of announced that in the context of like, so Leonard and I were quite close for a while before he got out of prison. He heard that I studied psychedelic literature, which is like my original focus before I had to get into the messy stuff. And I had gotten a copy of his book, The Rose of Paracelsus, which is this like, fictionalized literary autobiography where it's fiction. Like a lot of even the Shulgin's books are like that, where it's like telling the truth through the fictional
also,
kind of like
James Fadiman's
story.
Another Side of Hate that I'm reading right now is also doing that with the CIA working out of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, but that's another story.
I hadn't heard of that one.
It's very he's signaling some things in this book. It's interesting.
Yeah. And so Leonard, like when he was in prison, he would like call me and like we would like write back and forth and like email, like I would read his book and tell him what I thought and ask kind of questions, and we had kind of a correspondence, and we were quite close. Like when I had like a breakup, I was like calling it, he called me, I was like crying, getting his input. So but then he got out, and the first like year or so after he was out, he was doing a lot of conference talks where he would put up 2 slides, like one of Hamilton, and kind of like speak to the great work Hamilton was doing, and then he would put up a slide about me and talk about the work that I was doing. So we were the two of us were like people that he was like lifting up in the immediate aftermath of getting out, which I find really interesting, just the way that things have kind of played out.
Yeah, fascinating.
Hamilton is like, but I I can see the ways that Leonard's kind of proximity to power, and like, cause he's a useful asset as this like storied guy who got out of prison, life sentence, like he's being feted, by a lot of these powerful interests in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And, he has seen the way that Hamilton has been, targeting me based on lies, and like chose that context of time to launch a project with Hamilton. So it's like, there's something going on there that like, I feel like he should know better, but that's where his
and he hasn't said anything to you since kind of deepening his involvement with Hamilton about has he ever acknowledged that such a conflict has developed between Psymposia and Hamilton?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few conversations with him about it, with just like, you know, like the fact that, because he knows that the lies are lies, like he knows that this narrative that's being pushed, that's causing, you know, like pretty like what should be, I think, unacceptable rhetoric. I mean, that channel 5 video that came out, that was like the week after Charlie Kirk was
exactly.
Yeah, emotions were high. And didn't he say, how do we take down these bastards or something?
Well, it was exactly like the type of thing Kash Patel was saying about like these sort of leftist
terrorists.
Yeah, that's
it was riding a wave of that, honestly.
And he knows those are lies. Like he doesn't believe that. Like he was lying and it was like, honestly, like I know that, like, you know, I don't expect him to say anything nice about Psymposia. However, like, you know, I know like that, you know, he doesn't like you for the reasons that you've stated. You know, you're an existentialist for him, as you should be. But like, you know, I still was shocked by like the gall of what he said, and like how flagrantly he was lying when I saw that interview. Like
it was so aggressively like defamatory and ridiculous and telling, though, you know, that somebody has to resort to these kind of hysterical ad hominems about, well, this is just beyond the pale, and so you can't take it's always comes back to you can never read a Psymposia like article. Like, don't ever read Psymposia. Don't ever engage with their work at all. Even I feel like I don't go around saying like don't read something. It's like, I don't know, like if there's something I feel like I'm going to oppose, I'd like to read it so I know how to attack it.
We're the opposite. We do read everything like that. Yeah, but sorry, you were saying about
clearly we're like that too. Like we really want to understand the way that people think who don't think like us, and so it's like, and that's a strength of ours that we are like very familiar with the way that they talk to each other and their ideological commitments and that sort of thing. And so it ultimately, like, you know, I kind of like the fact that so many people are just in this completely false image of us because they're completely unprepared for what we're capable of. You know, it's like they think that they can write us off, and that leaves us like, they don't know what we're doing. They don't have any sense of what's actually going on because they're in this like very superficial image of us as some kind of like parody. So I always say, like, I kind of like being underestimated because like I know what we're capable of and I know the importance of what we're doing.
100%. Yeah, when they see the 200-page report, you know, with so many receipts attached to it and, you know, references for everything, like it is, I think it is going to cause people to, like, you know, the people that do look are going to actually engage with it and be surprised that this is not what all their favorite little gurus are telling them, which is like, oh, it's so stupid. They're big pharma. They're funded by cops or something. Like, it just, you know, it's so, it's like childish. Like the way they try to.
That is like totally Darvo. Like, as we said, like
Darvo.
You know, it's like reverse victim and offender. Like the idea that like you're somehow like these paid agents when it's like, you can just
and their small bean routine is getting harder to put up. Like, you know, for a while, you could say Maps like 20, 30 years ago was like a kind of underdog, you know, a marginal player in the culture. But now with all these like tech people backing it, it's like you're not a little small bean. You're not like exempt from being able to, it's not like out of bounds to like criticize the most powerful people in the country or the people that have the most influence of anybody. You know, if they're saying some bullshit, Hamilton could always change. Hamilton could stop like interpreting, like promoting sus versions of like psychedelic use and and papering over, often just through a mission of like engaging with them on like a social media thing like that live stream without like anybody acknowledging like, hey, Genevieve Jurvetson, your husband and you invest in the company that employed me for the last 5 years. You know, he just doesn't say that. Oh, I've been working in university, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, shut the fuck up. Like you just start being real about like, if you really believe in Peter Thiel and Steve Jurvetson's, you know, version of psychedelics, like, I don't know, say it with your chest, or better, maybe do some reflection, you know, like.
I mean, a lot of it does rely on like not seeing these like connections. Like, I think that like, there's like, it's crazy how like many people like, there's always these figures that like are put up to kind of like, catch like certain demographics, and it's obvious that Hamilton is one, and that like and many people see him in a certain way, but when you see like who he associates with and like it, I feel like that but yeah, it's papered over. But I was wondering, like, in terms of like going back to Pickard for a second, do you see any like connection between, in terms of like psychedelic literature, do you see like any connection between like the Rose of Paracelsus and like this kind of image of like sort of a psychedelic aristocracy? Like, because I know that's like a sort of an element, like an esoteric kind of order, is the sort of like the sort of LSD synthesizers and that book. Do you see like any parallel between like this kind of psychedelic literature and like the kind of ideology that we're seeing now, like becoming so core to, or I guess part of like your thesis is how this does emerge from the psychedelic underground, but I'm wondering if you see like a lineage there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think in the Rose of Paracelsus, there's kind of like one aspect of the story is that there is this like cosmic battle between the forces that are trying to liberate consciousness and the forces that are trying to restrict consciousness. And there's also like, so opioids are kind of like the enemy's drug, it's kind of like the forces that are trying to stupefy and make people forget, what's really important, whereas psychedelics are liberating people from their conditioning in that book. So there's an inherent, because that kind of matches the way that I saw like some discourse around like Zionist interpretations of October 7th was like the war of the like good drugs versus bad drugs, like like the
the Nova Festival,
and it's like the fighters, they were like on psychedelic-esque like amphetamines that were like helping them fight, and so it's kind of through that lens of like there's an implicit hierarchy there for starters. And then there's also some other details, like there is a demonic exorcism scene that occurs through like sexual like touch that is not consented to. And there was like a conversation, I saw someone asked him at a Breaking Convention conference, psychedelics conference a few years ago, someone went to Q&A and like asked about that scene, because it's like there's this big problem in the psychedelic underground of like people feeling entitled to like use sexual touch as like some kind of exorcism of healing. And he didn't really quite like answer the question. Like, he didn't really acknowledge the like the truth of that problem. And there's another aspect of this that I actually I've only been thinking back to this in the past few weeks with like a kind of a new lens to it. But there's a scene where I think he's like in India, and there's a woman who's like begging for like food and like holding a baby that has like the umbilical cord still attached to it, and is kind of like dragging it around. And the story implies that the babies are just created to give the impression to like make people feel bad and feel like they have to give money, and that they actually like they just keep popping them out just as a form of manipulation.
Wow.
And I realized that that's kind of similar to how people think of like people in Gaza, in Palestine, where it's like children are just a means of manipulation. And so it's like justifying the kind of like, well, they kind of are doing this to themselves because they're the ones that are using their children as like human shields or whatever else.
Wow. I mean, like I told you before we started recording, I haven't actually read that book, so I only know like the broad strokes of it. But yeah, that is, I mean, I also see an overlap between like Joseph Bach, we were just talking about, like his vision of like fascism as the idea of thinking about human beings as all one organism, or one big quantum computer, to use the Kim's term that we were talking about before, where like certain cells can be expunged, and like some are like more important than others, and some like can be refreshed or expendable in a way, and like it also like it's interesting because there's this kind of a big dimension of this on one hand you have this sort of population concern, but on the other hand you have this kind of idea of like declining birth rates that has like this racial dimension. Like for instance, for Elon Musk, this is a huge thing, but that's always juxtaposed with this kind of Camp of the Saints type. Like it's not just about birth rates in general, it's like it's represented in that way, but really it's about like you know, it's a Camp of the Saints kind of horror of like, oh, you know, these other people are having babies and they're not like our white,
we need to
you know, our white babies
with our birth rates and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
so,
Yosha
sort of
Bach said that to Epstein. He used the cells metaphor about
right.
you know,
Exactly.
cells should just be killed off. You know.
Some cells like thinking of the human being as one organism, that is fascism, which is right.
That's the sort of like, you know, interconnection, like connection to hierarchy that I was talking about earlier. It's like when you see things that way, there's like acceptable sacrifices of like, you know, like you wouldn't want to empathize with like cancer cells and like allow the cancer to proliferate. So there's a lot of that in the psychedelic kind of like world. So, but I still do think that there's this like kernel of like radical creative like potential in psychedelics, but that's just kind of being like pushed down by this focus on like extending imperialism through psychedelics. And so one thing that I was glad that you all actually picked up on in the Psychedelic Syndicate, because I did like a lot of the kind of like the architecture for that and like the ways that the sections like flow into the kind of the structure of it. And a lot of that structure is informed by my PhD in psychedelic literature and like the ways that like my deep experience of like being with trippy texts and like using literary devices to communicate on like multiple levels simultaneously and like without talking about the fact that it's doing so. So it's like there's the genre that we produced is this highly experimental hybrid genre where it's like it is cutting edge literature, cutting edge journalism, you know, a journalistic report. It is also, you know, like a policy memo, bioethics, like cutting edge there, but it's also psychedelic literature and it's also written for the heads.
It's a hypertext. It's a kind of, it does have a kind of psychedelic hypertext kind of nested quality of like so many like little like YouTube clips, like little side rabbit holes you can
it's like a fractal of rabbit holes. Like I think something that came up in the previous conversation. So there's that, and I was really glad that you pointed out the AI like mini sci-fi interlude. That felt really important to be able to communicate, like, because it's like when you hear someone with that kind of like privileged charismatic authority, they sound reasonable, and so he's like, of course, like we will get away with all of the meaningful work and have only like barely survivable human labor to service the AI. And like, you know, people nod along when they hear him say that because it's like, oh yes, this like rich white man is saying something confidently. So it's like to actually like step outside of his filter of like, let's actually look at what this is saying. You know, I felt like we needed that kind of like sci-fi interlude to be able to make that point.
Yeah, because Netflix might not produce it, or Larry Ellison might not produce it because they don't want they want all their dystopian sci-fi to look heckin' awesome and like cyberpunk, like it's so that we'll be happy with living in it. But they don't want to you know, I've yet to see that dramatized, but you did a great job of it. It's very memorable.
And I mean, like that is also like that. Like I mean, I think that like the best literature like is, you know, but like what you described, like it also has like an ethical dimension. It also has like, you know, it also has like it's not just like an amusing story. You know, it's not like Game of Thrones or whatever. I know we were just having an argument whether there's any ethics to that, but I don't think there is. And you know, like so I think that. You know, I think that like, and that is also something that's under attack is human literacy and like the ability to like, you know, process information, you know, and I think that like, and you actually do see the same people, like, you know, at one level it's like, oh, these particular people, like we don't want to read it, but it's also like, you actually do see like Jurvetson kind of demeaning like, and Newer, this person, you know, kind of demeaning like the length of it. You know, and like demeaning like the you know the depth of it, like that is in itself like something that's bad. That like you wrote a lot, you know, like it's too like, you know, like it's like that. Like look how crazy the Psymposia people are. They tried and they wrote something long, and like but that is part of like their part of their ethos, which is that like don't read, just listen to us like in these sort of short form videos telling you about how great everything is going to be, and like you know do your psychedelics and art therapy, and like it's kind of I mean, and I totally honestly, like, you know, and I think that
talking,
like
I'm just gonna step out for a second. Keep going.
Well, sure, yeah. But in terms of and by the way, we can end whenever you feel you need to leave. Like, you know, just like let us know. I know we didn't like check like how long do you want to go for, but if you want to end at any time, just feel interrupt us and say we'll we'll keep going. But yeah, but no, it is oh, what was I even saying? I was talking about books. I was talking, psychedelics is like having a radical creative potential. I mean, like, I think that like some of these technologies, like, yeah, like you were talking about before, like they could like be good in some ways, you know, like like LLMs, like I think LLMs could be useful for like machine translation, you know. Obviously you can't like trust it unflinchingly, you still need to go through it, but like to get a sense of something like these skill could be like, these could have applications, but it's the discourse like around them, it's the presentation of them, it's the way that they're framed like in a way that like demeans like the human mind, like human intellect, and like that they're represented as like somehow being a replacement for human intelligence, that, or even as being artificial intelligence at all, rather than like, you know, a text prediction tool, is like where the like the real problem with it comes in, you know. Like there's it's not like a big part of what's like so repugnant. And I mean, I'm sure like since, you know, you work in in academia, you know, like you have like, in fact, like you teach writing, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like you probably have like witnessed some of the problems that like the effect that AI is having on education. But a big part of it, I think, is like how students interact with it and like how they perceive it. More so, like if it were like properly contextualized and seen as something that like actually doesn't replace reading or writing, and that writing is about thinking, then like it wouldn't be. But it's so hard to overcome the hurdle of like the way that it's been marketed, you know.
No, absolutely. And like, you know, a lot of people in the psychedelic field have really like tried to discount me in my role in the field as saying like, oh, I'm just a writer, but it really like belies their ignorance about like the fact that writing is thinking, and that like if you are really intentional about writing and exploring ideas, you can also learn to think in quite complex ways by virtue of the writing process. And so I do think it's like very central to a lot of the work that I do. But you're right, it absolutely has been really sad to see the impact it's having on college age students, which is the age that I'm, you know, interacting with. So I don't like teach younger. I'm sure it's impacting them also. But at this age range, like, you know, well, first of all, it was designed to be confident sounding. And so like the like ChatGPT and stuff to kind of give the sense of like, computer, tell me da da da, and then gives an answer. That was a design choice. Like they could have baked in more like qualification into the way that the answers are put out. And what happens with these confident sounding responses is that to the place where curiosity would be, and kind of like fills that gap.
Yes.
You suture that. And so then you continue on and you no longer wonder about that question or that perspective that you had. And so it's kind of closing people off with a narrative data set that can be tinkered with by these billionaires, like we talk about in the report. It's like what the preferred narratives are get to be steered and engineered. And then a lot of students, like college age students, it's been very like kind of heartbreaking, is that because the AI is so normalized and everyone's like using it, a lot of them don't feel like they know how to write well yet. And so they're like, well, the AI that's better than I could have said it.
Yes,
and so they want to like, there's like that impulse to then use the AI. And because like I had a conversation with a student about this, and because like I know, having taught from before AI was around, I know what this age group sounds like when they're writing normally. And so they don't know that we can tell that they're using AI because it sounds polished to them. But it's like I tried to explain, you know, you're amputating this like skill set. It's like with being sedentary, where it's like you can you know not have to walk anywhere, but then you're not gonna have like the ability to move in the world. And so but it's absolutely, it's the same. This thing about the AI connection.
No, go ahead. Yeah,
it's the same kind of like coordinated astroturf is pushing AI into like the government, into universities. Like all these universities are having like agreements. Like Hopkins, where I teach, gives students this like Hop AI paid versions of like ChatGPT,
Right.
Claude, like all integrated into one, and
That's
encourages
awful.
people to use that. And it's not just by chance that that's happening. Like there is the AI industry wants to normalize this, and they're working with these institutions to push this through. So that's why we towards the end of the report we say we're at a very dangerous time. Like there's like we still have these skills, those of us who are older and we're able to like learn to think, but they're trying to take this away from us. And so I think it's like important for those of us who can see what's going on to at least like alert people to what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I've had that exact same conversation with my undergraduates, like that you described, like where it's like, you might have like this might have better grammar than you, but it cannot think better than you because it can't think. But like it's a very hard like thing to like communicate because like you're right, like I've said this on the show like probably like over 10 times, but like between like 2023 and like now, you saw like original thought just die in like undergraduate writing, and it really was like, but yeah, there's like a very clear connection, I think, and like it does have to do with like all these people. It is like definitely a relevant thing because all these same people who are in the same space, like they do have this kind of attitude of like this whole push that we're seeing now, like the great administration that Genevieve Jurvetson loves so much and that Hamilton is so hopeful about, is like coordinating an attack on like the universities in general and especially on the humanities.
Yeah.
Like which, is like, and why? Like, why do they like want to, like destroy the value that like or undermine the value of the humanities and like boost up like quote unquote science and STEM, which of course like they're like presenting themselves as the ambassadors for, because like obviously like I'm not saying that I'm not doing this kind of like a sort of feel good problem where people like, oh, if you study the humanities you're going to be a good person. Same thing with psychedelics, it's like, okay, well, you got Heidegger or whatever, like he was a very erudite person, he was a Nazi. Carl Schmitt, who's a Nazi, like obviously the humanities doesn't have any particular political valence or particular politics. However, what it does involve is that all those people, whether they ultimately result to be fascists or not, is that they do have like a sort of scope of different ideas and like an idea of like criticism and crisis and critical thought, like the idea of like weighing two possibilities and like surveying like different modes of thinking and different modes of processing information, rather than like the alternative, which I think is you say very rightly, that like AI it's curated in a way where it's like I am the oracle instead of like I don't know, a list of sources, like a list of the things in its training data that like brought up like that those terms like if it actually like made its like processing or like its hidden tokens transparent, it would be totally different. It would just be like a supplement to your typical search engine. Where it said like this is like these are the hits in my training data for like the terms that you use or something, which is actually what's going on, but it occults that process. This is, but that like everything is being streamlined into this thing. And yeah, like I think it's really it's totally not like a tangent because it really is the exact same thing.
I'm realizing here that there is a parallel to be made between people that think using AI makes them creative and people who think just using psychedelics makes them automatically creative. Because I think we've all met some people like that, right?
Yes.
And of course, I think that creative people could use AI creatively as a tool, and creative people can use psychedelics as a tool, but it does not make one automatically creative, like by virtue of just taking it, right? And there's like a similar shortcut of like psychedelics makes me a spiritually advanced, like hyper empathetic, creative, like all these positive attributes, kind of like a very emotionally intelligent person. And even maybe makes my like IQ go up or something like that. That's what these Silicon Valley people believe, but it's like a cheat pill or something that it just gives you that. And I feel like that's missing the point and is a potential trap, just like getting AI to do your writing for you and being like, I created this, or like I created this Suno AI song, like you're not creating, like, right?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me because I was thinking about like Duolingo, and like the way that app works is that, which uses a bunch of AI stuff now. The way that the app is designed is it like taps into the feeling of having learned, but you're not actually learning the language, and so it's like exploiting that and fulfilling that desire to learn, but but then it's kind of an opportunity cost, because like you could be focusing on like doing things that would actually help you learn the language, but you're distracted by this app and this like gamification. And same thing with psychedelics and AI in general, where it's like there's a feeling of meaningfulness and significance and like certitude and like clarity, but that's not actually like, you know, a lot of that certainly in some contexts is like the feeling abstracted from real meaning and like real like thought and that kind of thing. And so people are just like kind of complacent with it, and they don't realize that they're kind of giving up on something that's more real in some cases. So I'm not saying that's like all psychedelic use, but I do see that use of psychedelics where it's like that the feeling of profundity stands in for like actually developing like your life.
Yeah, especially when you see a kind of like a very similar like aesthetic template be adopted by, you know, not to pick on any one particular group, but it's like, you know, I see it a lot in like LA and California, like people that become burners and like make that like their personality. Now of course all kinds of people go to Burning Man and stuff, but like there's a type of kind of like all right, we got the burner uniform on, like we got the namaste tattoo here, and like, you know, it's like or these like these kind of retreats in Tulum or in like Bali or something like that, like these very kind of usually more like moneyed kind of places where people are kind of going for like spiritual tourism, and adopting a kind of like very like one size fits all kind of like spiritual vibe about them, which is like, it's like, oh, you know, you could do literally anything. You could like take psychedelics and then literally adopt any aesthetic that you want. like you don't have to be like a beach hippie or like a steampunk person or like things like that. I just think it's like, you know, people kind of fall into like these sort of types, and but I don't know, maybe on the extreme end of both AI and psychedelics, it also could cause psychosis of some kind, you know?
Well, I mean, like both of you are probably more experienced with psychedelics than I am. I mean, I know for a fact that both of you are, but like, I think that like there is like an element of, like narrowing too. Like there can be this kind of like expansive, but there also can almost be like this hyper focus that happens like in, you know, and, I think, you know, that like is like another thing that I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm like interpreting it through like my own lens, but it's something that I notice where people, and I think that this might be something that factors into the kind of like psychedelic scene too, where like they have this kind of zeal. I almost feel like that's an expression of this kind of hyper focus that can happen, where like, you know, you focus on one goal or one kind of like you know, like one priority. And like in some cases that actually can be like, you know, evangelization of the psychedelic experience itself. I don't know. What do you think about that, Neşe?
Many cases. I mean, that's a very common outcome where people just become like super attached to the movement. And I honestly think it's also at play, as I talked about my terrestrial hallucinations paper, at like in the terrestrial worldview in Silicon Valley, because I think they're taking psychedelics, they're having these experiences that are confirming, lo and behold, these perspectives. I actually am like divinely chosen to be in this role, and then it kind of confirms for them that they're on the right path, and it's like a feedback loop that's making people more and more convinced of the rightness of what they're doing. So, like, I definitely get that sense. You do see it a lot with the psychedelic evangelism, and this kind of gets back to something you asked at the very beginning in terms of like because I did start out as I describe myself as like a reformed psychedelic cheerleader. I went through that phase for myself, you know, like part of the reason I describe MAPS as like a therapy cult is like I was on the inside there at first, and like other people who were on the inside also are like, yeah, like Neşe is not like joking about that, like there's those dynamics at play. And so I was on this kind of like, you know, convinced that I was part of something like that was going to change the world. And I was like really, you know, found that really meaningful. It was, as someone who like grew up with a really bad social anxiety, not just social anxiety, I had like really bad OCD that was like impacting my like daily life. It was actually the first time that I ever felt part of a community was the psychedelic community when I found it. You know, like I had these personal experiences that really helped change my whole, like my debilitating as I talked about in that Guardian article that also interviewed Bryan Johnson, I had this like experience where like my intrusive thoughts about death, like I completely like reframed like my perspective on that. And then the intrusive thoughts that I struggled with my entire life, like stopped coming. And that was my kind of like, that's why I started working in the field, because I was like, this experience that I wasn't supposed to have was like the most profound experience of my life. And I thought that was like, I was like, there was something there that didn't make sense to me. And so I wanted to like kind of explore that. But absolutely kind of like seeing all of the downsides and the rape culture of it all just really kind of eventually snapped me out of it. And maybe I hadn't really talked about this, but just as because you mentioned the NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming and hypnosis stuff, my opening of the therapy cult analysis begins with this event that I went to when I was a MAPS volunteer, and people have said like that event is like I'm obviously making stuff up because it's so extreme, and so they don't take anything that I write after that seriously, except that like not only did that actually happen, but I have like my journals from the time, like writing the quotes from the meeting and stuff. So it's like I like have the evidence of it.
Can you break down what happened at that MAPS event?
Well, so MAPS basically was like kind of a bat signal in the sky for people who like found psychedelics. It's like a lot of people, especially at that time, this was like back, you know, in that 2010 timeframe, psychedelics were still very stigmatized. It was still very much like not something you discussed in like kind of polite company. And so people who did through life experience, like kind of find themselves kind of in that situation where they're like, they tried psychedelics and they're like, whoa, what just happened to me? And kind of wanting to know more. By virtue of like the name MAPS, like the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, it kind of signaled that this was like a kind of a gathering place for people. So it's like people would meet at MAPS conferences or like go out to volunteer for MAPS. There were like, I went out there, a bunch of other people went out to California when I was also volunteering, who volunteered like with me. So they kind of just attracted people into their orbit. But then there was this one, they were doing an auction for some art that they ended up like the auctioneer that they were working with, that like I was in a kind of vulnerable place at the time. Like I had taken, because I come from like a poor family. This informs a lot of my analysis and why I don't like just step in line with all the rich people telling me how the world actually exists. But I had like had just recently, I'd been saving money, working nonstop, like outside of college and trying to like make some kind of like stability for myself. And then I ended up like losing a lot of money to like my brother at the time, who gave me like kind of a sob story about how he needed to fix his car to continue at his workplace. And I wanted to be the stability that my family like wasn't ever able to provide. And so I offered to like loan him the money. And it turned out that he was actually like addicted to oxys at the time. And it's like, that was like just like a cover story. So I lost all that money. And because of that, I was in a very like stressed place in my life and looking for meaning and looking to make like something positive come out of this like terrible thing that just happened, because I was also so anxious about money. It was especially hard for me in ways that people who don't grow up poor, like they don't understand like how deep and intense that is. But so they ended up kind of like kind of giving out free wine. And then also there was this like atmosphere of like donating to MAPS is like good for the world, and like this is gonna all work out, and you just have to trust and not like think about it. There was that kind of like ethos around the whole event. And then I ended up buying this like expensive painting that I could not afford, and you know, the next day I was just like mortified and like, you know, thinking through like, can I like get out of this? And I didn't want to disrupt my connections with these people, like this field that I just found really meaningful. So I paid for the painting. And then they, as a result of that, I think they thought that I was wealthy because like usually people with money buy, you know, paintings and stuff. So then they invited me. I have a picture with like Stan Groff and like a few other people at this like invitational dinner. And then after that, they invited me to this training for MAPS volunteers. And it was called the Enlightened Salesman training. And at that training, they essentially taught me how I was manipulated to pay for money that I didn't have. Because the whole focus of that event was like using tools like hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming to get past the defenses of people who otherwise wouldn't want to give money to MAPS. Whoa. With the gist being that, you know, it's ultimately in their interests to give MAPS money, but they just don't know it. And so it was used to justify. And this was like hearing this, having just experienced that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then my journals from my journal from that event that has my like notes as everyone's talking, it's really sad in retrospect because it's like you could see it. I couldn't see it back then. Like I was really focused on like, wow, I'm so glad to have met this like community and I finally feel like I'm like part of something. And then there are these notes about kind of manipulating people because supporting MAPS is in everyone's best interest. And it's kind of like, it took me a lot of years to, because I ended up like, I always blamed myself for that painting, like until very recently. Like I felt a lot of shame about it and did not really see how it fit into a bigger pattern of like ends justifies the means like approaches, and how it's often at the expense of people who are vulnerable, who don't have, you know, who want to be feeling like they're part of something and doing something meaningful. That bear the brunt of that attitude. So I kind of like eventually like pieced together like, oh, like that's kind of weird that was and like kind of a red flag about the way that this organization was like operating.
Oh my God, totally. So they just straight up told you like we did psychological tricks on you to psyop you into buying that, like manipulate you into doing that with this and that. It was NLP, I imagine.
Because then it was the auctioneer who was doing the training, who was like this is like kind of how I did it. But he felt I think they all felt like I was part of the in group then, you know, like I was in. They'd
let you in on the secret, the magician's trick. That's so. I mean, I've had this thought like throughout our conversation of like, seems a little analogous to Scientology, and it's like they're not charging you for a course like straight up, but they're kind of doing like the same thing that they get people, especially if they detect that you have money. You know, makes you think about all these PSFC board members that are like the generational heirs of great fortunes or whatever. Like, how susceptible must they be to this kind of NLP love bombing? You're special, like a lot. I mean, people kind of like, I don't know, people maybe don't think about how kind of like maybe a little screwy or off or like not well adjusted, like the super inherited wealth class, you know, scions are. Like a lot of them get into trouble and drugs and like do, you know, like wild stuff and they're not all like rich, like well adjusted, goody two shoe, whatever. And a lot of times they're like deeply searching for meaning and they have a lot of resources. Like unlike most people, they had this like mountain of wealth that they kind of have access to, and that it's like a perfect target for like the Nexium cult, all these other cults. Like you go down the list, they tend to target. I would say like they see like a gold mine when they see like a super wealthy person, you know, and then they can get somebody to fund them for life if they hook them the right way, you know, and make them feel special.
Your notes like on that you like have in your MAPS as an MDA therapy cult article like are, you know, I mean I feel like they're worth like talking about a little bit because like it is very interesting because it does like, you know, we've talked a little bit about like hypnosis like in Erickson and people like that like in the past and like the kind of history of hypnosis and like the, you know, the CIA interested in things like that, or in, you know, mind control and in the intelligence community, and I mean, it is interesting, like what they say, like you know, you've taken the note, like you know, trance music, flashing lights with particular frequencies, you know, like a long series of inductions may be necessary for people with a lot of walls. This is an interesting one. The permission always lies with the subject, who must be completely willing to submit. I mean, this is something that you do hear people say often, like, you know, and I'm sure that it is true in a way, like in a stage hypnosis context or in a hypnotherapy context. But as you write in your notes immediately after, like, hypnosis is not a form of unconsciousness, it's a form of high awareness, which, you know, again, this is another like kind of lie, because like it's like, you know, yeah, like when you do have this hyper focus, you're definitionally unconscious of other things. Like this is why people talk about highway hypnosis.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, you're hyper focused on one thing, but like you're not focused. Yeah.
You
It's
zone
like when they have
out.
the gorilla in a suit like walk through, like, have you seen like there's experiments where they have someone dressed as the gorilla that's like walking through the room, and if you ask someone to like focus on a specific thing, they don't notice the gorilla that's like coming through.
Yeah. Right. And like, yeah, so the very fact that can, you know, that type of hyperfocus can happen like when you're just like playing a video game or like scrolling Instagram or like on like driving for a long time, that kind of proves that like it's not about like being willing to submit. It's like, you know, obviously when you volunteer to go on stage, like for like a hypnosis show, that's like kind of you know, a consent or something. But a lot of the time people who do that are like, oh, I'm not going to go along with this, but like it's still, you know, they feel themselves like it's not as that sounds like kind of a hedge to me, or kind of they're kind of you know, rationalizing it, when really like the fact is that like it's much blurrier in terms of like, especially when we're talking about like neurolinguistic programming. And
Well, that actually came up in the notes. Like, so that was one of the things that the auctioneer said, as like he said that you know, it, like kind of like, don't worry, it won't work unless they're consenting. And it kind of like, I even could like remember it kind of like reassured everyone, like hearing that, like, you know, it's the best for them anyway to do this. It's in their interest for MAPS to have money, and they structurally must be in on it if it's working. And those two things like justify the process. Like a lot of the techniques are like working like pickup artistry.
Yes,
like it's like there are things that you can do that are about the management and direction of attention that like lead people to misperceive things in ways that you can then exploit for your own interests.
And you think with
very like, well, that is actually like, I think we even read about this like way back when we were talking about like Milton and Erickson,
George Estabrooks.
Like that, like the idea of like, you know, you've already agreed to this is like a hypnotic technique.
Yes.
Like if you believe that hypnosis can only work on you if you've already consented to it, then if it seems to be working on you, then that means that I must have consented to this. And therefore like it's a loop that can happen. You know, like so it
also
like,
with psychedelics, to piggyback off that, like psychedelics both, they like kind of subjectively in your own experience, like they have an effect on you that heightens your suggestibility and your susceptibility to a kind of like hypnotic state. And the act of like knowingly taking a psychedelic substance, whether it's in a therapy setting or like a journey group or like a rave or something like that, like you're kind of accepting to like it. Just the act of taking something is like, I'm gonna go into a different shift of like consciousness. Like you're kind of in an ambient sense, like accepting, you know, whatever the drug's going to do to you and open you up to. So even in that setting, it's like they don't even have to do a like stare at this and like, you know, count down from 10, like kind of thing, because you're already kind of giving that like ambient, like you're kind of letting it in a little bit. But I mean, I still think people don't want to take things and then be like unwittingly manipulated after that. That's not cool, obviously, but I could see like the MAPS kind of trainers rationalizing it this way, is like, well, you know, like they've all agreed to be here and take the drug, so in that sense, like we should just proceed and like use NLP on them, and like, you know, it's like they consented. It's like, well, maybe they didn't consent to all of it, but
you connect this like in your article to like George Sarlo and like his like relationship with Vicky Dulai, like the whole situation, like, you know, that like she wanted to like fundraise around the drug experience, you know, and these type of things. That was like a sales tactic. Like, yeah, if you get like, you know, you can definitely see how like the ethics of this are questionable.
Definitely. Definitely. And the induction connection that you mentioned, Dimitri, is something I've been talking to a neuroscience friend of mine who's studying hypnosis, and we've been talking about that exact idea, because it's like there's a lot of other aspects of like the induction that goes on in the MAPS therapy. Like they pull like tarot cards very, very commonly,
Really?
or like animal spirit cards, and they point to synchronicities with your, like prior to the dosing session, before you take the MDMA. It's like there's multiple examples where they will point to like, oh, there was a kind of synchronicity with your dream or something you heard on the radio. And so they're kind of entering you into this context of synchronicity, and like they will say to people, the medicine started working when you made the intention to join the trial.
Interesting.
That's like a direct quote.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
it's like then because they have this induction, the context of like the altered state, so there's this like clear difference in consciousness that's like interplaying with that. It's priming people to have these kind of like transpersonal types of experiences that are then justifying the belief in the inner healing intelligence and the fact that the facilitators can accurately attune to what is trying to emerge. And sometimes that is using these like leading kinds of like interventions. So it's a way of like kind of like a spider, like bringing people into this justification system for what they do.
It is interesting how like so many like hypnotic inductions, like especially like in a kind of a therapeutic setting, or like, you know, like when they say like a long induction may be needed, like a lot of what that is like a guided visualization a lot of the time, you know, like picture like this, or like, you know, like like giving you this sort of like imagery, you know, which obviously is like a part of like psychedelic facilitation like as well, and like a huge emphasis in like the kind of culture around psychedelics is like seeing, you know, like what you're gonna visualize and things like that. I mean, yeah, it's it is interesting. And like when you talk about like this in terms of like the, you know, the therapy and everything, like it's interesting. Like I guess, you know, this might be, I guess it makes sense that this is something that was revealed like in a kind of in-group context, because I can see, you know, how people might be like, oh, like I'm undergoing hypnosis. This is like a little bit weird. It seems different from like, you know, oh, your inner spirit is being kind of facilitated or something. I don't know. Yeah. Internally directed. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Which is one thing, maybe not directly related, but to that broader context that I wanted to mention in terms of the in-group and like that information being shared with me. One of the challenges that I've had, like in terms of people like not seeing me as a bad actor and like realizing that I actually have like a point that like I'm communicating in good faith, is that people will have experienced the walk up like version, the exoteric facing, public facing side of MAPS, which is the like recruiting ground for like, it's people like me that are willing to go along with the trust the process, that get invited to these other meetings where, and then people that are not like open to that kind of thing, they're checked at the door and they don't even realize that they weren't invited to these other meetings. And so this is how a lot of these groups work, where there's a public facing recruiting ground that they kind of gauge. Yeah. They kind of gauge who has the kind of the type of personality that might be open to these like other aspects of the organizational culture.
God, it's it's crazy. Yeah,
we were talking last time with another like overlap with Scientology, which you also mentioned the same like a report, which is like the sort of IFS, like the internal family systems thing, where like this kind of, which basically like has like kind of a methodology for like demonic exorcism, like, or like sort of like it's very similar to what Scientology like what Dianetics like aims at a lot of the time. It's like getting rid of these
parasitic
thetans,
that are
thetans, that like are I guess they got blown up by a volcano and then they attached to. It's actually I'm not 100% clear like what because what is the human essentially like in the Scientology, like, you know, if you get rid of your thetans, like what's left. But anyway, that's kind of orthogonal, like it is. This is like another thing we brought up last time, like this idea of like unattached burdens, which like are burdens that like I guess don't originate from you. They're basically like thetans, like they're clinging to you, but they're not like you know, actually internal to you. They, you know, are somehow like I'm not actually sure what their ontology is, like, are they just simply like, where do they come from? Are they like, from like what exactly do you
I'm not really sure like where they come from, but they are represent so people in IFS are like very intent on like this is like essential part of the worldview, the process, that there is this like these unattached burdens, demonic kind of parasitic parts, but they don't tell you about that until you get to like stage 4 or whatever it is, so it's like it's only after you've gone through the first levels of the process that you're provided with this information that's actually core to the whole theory. But then like people who don't understand how cultic dynamics work, like they're like, oh well, they don't even mention it until 4, so it must not be a big deal, not understanding that it's because like it's like a secret knowledge that's given to people who are receptive to it.
Very similar to Scientology. They don't tell you about Lord Xenu at OT1,
or like the origins of the Thetans, like getting a bomb drop in the volcano and such, until later on. Now that's like very high level.
I mean, serving all of this, Neşe, like the kind of like ultimate question I have is what continuity, if any, do you see between this milieu and the way it operates, this psychedelic milieu and the way it operates, and programs like MK Ultra and like mind control programs, both for the individual level to like use psychedelics on people, but also like control groups and group dynamics? Do you see a link? Because there's like overlap in lineage from the 60s and Esalen. And do you think there's still, does that explain something about how all these people are operating?
Yeah, it's hard to say, like, obviously, like, for sure, because there's like, but I think that like one fact of MK Ultra that I've always thought was really strange is that like the psychedelic field continuously points to that as like, oh, they tried using psychedelics for mind control, found it didn't work, and so therefore we must not like, all of this talk of cults is just like clearly made up and they don't know what they're talking about. That is very suspicious to me, because from my perspective, it's like they actually did find out how influenceable people are under different conditions, and then like lo and behold, we have this situation. And there's with the Aharon Grossbard, Francoise Borzat group, like saying like the character in Michael Pollan's book that is associated with Grossbard says that like I am the virus of Silicon Valley, and he was like people have suggested, I have not like looked into this, but multiple people have suggested a link with like intelligence with Aharon Grossbard.
He's Israeli, right?
Yeah, so like I don't know the truth of that, but I'm just saying
it wouldn't surprise me. And Gordon Todd Skinner was bopping around like Germany in the early '80s and then the Caribbean. I'm pretty convinced just from what I've seen, he's like a spy, or some kind of operative. And you go back to Al Hubbard and a couple other people from the '60s that just dance between the raindrops, giving LSD out left and right. And this, I don't know, this whole mythology that it escaped from the lab. Like all of the people that were the psychedelic heroes of the 60s took it in like MK Ultra adjacent sub-project conditions. They just did, right? Or it was passed out more informally through like Oscar Yaniger, Allen Ginsberg's cousin, who was a psychiatrist in Beverly Hills, giving it to celebrities. But Veterans Hospital in Palo Alto, the IFES, James Fadiman, Myron Stolaroff place, like, or Edgewood Arsenal, where Frank Zappa's dad worked. It just like it's like the idea that it just escaped, and then the CIA was like, well, it didn't work as an assassin tool, so whatever. And then it boomeranged. Everybody says this. This is like the 60s lore, that it escaped the lab and backfired. It was blowback against the CIA. And that's like, I feel like that might be like a central lie, that whatever was happening, subsequent to it being made illegal, that, I mean, if you look at who was funded, the Mellon Hitchcock family was funding this stuff at the Millbrook estate, right? And then you had like all the stuff at Stanford and that research, and like, I don't know, like so much of what we think is that that was what made it counterculture, is that it was like outlawed, and like, yeah, it was, but were they simultaneously kind of still involved with the sort of like outlaw networks and these gurus and all these people? Like, did they want to unleash it to disrupt the anti-war movement? Maybe, right? Like, I still don't know exactly for sure. Or, was this like we're unleashing a new social technology that's going to allow us to like remake sort of people's like social and group identities in certain ways that are amenable to capitalism and winning the Cold War, and the survival of our system, even if we have to manipulate and psyop everybody. I don't know. What do you think about that? Where do you land?
I mean, just everything I've been through this year, like I can't write stuff off anymore. Like it's just, I didn't expect to be target. I mean, like we were talking about the Knives Out earlier, of like seeing when you get a bit too close to stuff, and like how like the machine responds. It really has felt like I've referred to like the Matrix films, where it's like there's that's how I felt this year, where it's like there's this like surface society that like is claimed to be democratic, and like where people have like agency, and then there's like when you cause a problem for the machine, suddenly these like squid like robots, like
literal Hamilton Morris
like,
AI bots in suits like start coming after you. Actually, that's totally false.
And so it's like I've seen that happen to me, and I've seen how like complete lies can get published in the New York Times, like with no, like completely against their whole editorial review like standards and stuff, and like seeing how reality actually works, and like that there's these powerful interests that control things behind the scenes. I can't write stuff off anymore. So like I don't know the exact details of like, what, because it's easy to fall into like hand wavy conspiracy and like, oh, it's all MK Ultra, and like, but I think it's important to keep our minds open about like what's actually going on here and whose interests all of this is serving.
Right. I agree. I think it's a very like, when you really like, sometimes I'll say it's like it's CIA, it's MK Ultra, for the sake of I don't know, rhetorical effect, but it's definitely, it's a very complex thing that I don't think we still need to like pin down more and like figure it out, because I think, for example, like because I think you can go down the wrong rabbit holes if like you just assume that, well, no, they just secretly kept having MK Ultra after they said. It's like, I don't think that's what they did. I think they probably privatized aspects of it, and the research and the techniques that were derived from the original 20 years of the research, like I don't think they really burned all that stuff and like forgot about it. Those techniques, like how to create a cult, like I mean the Manson family, I think like is a perfect example, both about how LSD doesn't automatically make you like a amazing, like you could use it to brainwash people, to facilitate brainwashing, to make these teenager hippies like murder celebrities, like at the very least, right? And then there's all the help he was getting in the background and all this weird kind of stuff, but so it might have like split off into like these kind of privatized things have been put on ice for a while, and then like maybe they pivoted to a more broad kind of conception of like influencing society that was like, we saw a lot of derivatives of MK Ultra like in the 2000s in Guantanamo Bay. Like a lot of that type of torture and Abu Ghraib stuff was like kind of originally derived from MK Ultra and kind of came back.
I think also like, part of what is like, I think that like the sort of nuance that Neşe is like gesturing to like comes from partially as like looking at like the kind of the networks and like the intellectual like and social like history of it, like where we see actually like the tangible like social connections like among these people. And I think that also like at a certain point, like these things like, there's like, we have like the urine for the sea effect where like these things become like reinforcing. Like you don't need to like, pay, like bribe somebody, like they want to do it, they like they believe in this, like this is like what, like it's not like you don't need someone like meeting on a corner in like a trench coat. I mean obviously this is like I was just saying like like sneaking someone like a bunch of money. It's like keep promoting like no, like they don't like that like doesn't need to happen, like all like this kind of, but what is true and like doesn't need an explanation is that like we do actually see the cultivation of this, like, despite the fact that this was at one time perceived as, like, during the 60s, perceived as something that was, like, totally liberating for humanity, like radical, revolutionary, like a huge, like, threat to, like, the capitalist order or whatever, and also the communist order, I guess, if you're Stuart Brand, but, like, like something that, like, was, like this transformative social force, or this a technology or whatever. And, like, now, like, it is a technology of, like techno-feudal control. It was like how, like,
cybernetic control and brainwashing and
and, like, is that a is it a coincidence that the sort of MK Ultra, or intelligence community or military industrial complex model of, like, what the applications of this would be has prevailed over, like, this sort of, like, idea of, like, oh, it's going to make everybody see everyone else's humanity and we're all going to hold hands? Like, is that a coincidence? Like, I don't necessarily think so. Like, even if it's not, like, planned out by, like, a concrete, singular, uniform agency that, like, directed it from, like, step one to current step, that doesn't mean that it is a coincidence entirely. Like,
I definitely, I agree with that. It feels too weird, and too many of the people in the ruling class were intimately tuned into this counterculture stuff. I feel like for them just to let it run totally wild and, like, not have any kind of influence over it, and
to just seed like the MK Ultra research, like, pull the plug and just turn it over to, like, the hippies. Like, that doesn't seem like something the government would do.
Well, I guess,
I mean, this is something that we've been talking. Someone in our Discord just said this recently. Like, it's this kind of idea of, like, oh, yeah, sure, all those conspiracies happened in the past, but, like, if you bring them up, like, now in the present, like, that's not possible, that's crazy. It's like, yeah, like, we not, like, once they, like, it's like this idea that, like, everything were, like, constant, like, conspiracies and, like, hidden aspects of politics, and everyone was, like, lying and manipulating the population, like, up until, like, whatever, the date keeps getting pushed back. It's like public domain or something. It's like, that was true until, like, 2001. Like, but it hasn't been true since. Or, like, that was true until, like, 1999. But, like, everything since then, like, no. Like, it's just a matter of, like, when, I think the sort of the MK Ultra was stopped is an example of that. And, yeah, like, that's one of Dimitri's, like, favorite things to beat up on. So I could tell you were playing his song when you said that. I feel like the idea that, like, it was just shut down and they never, like, were interested in this ever again, and, like, that nothing came of it and it was a complete failure. Like, I mean, it wouldn't have even gone as long as it did if it were really a complete failure. Like, obviously, like, they were, like,
And I think, if you look at things like the Stanford Research Institute's, like, big paper, Changing Images of Man in 1974, which had a lot of people kind of in the Esalen scene kind of writing for it and talking about how we need to, like, re-enchant sort of, like, the American mythos and draw on, like, symbolism to create a kind of, like, new American kind of identity and, like, self-branding to, like, re-enchant us. And then Esalen doing its quiet work, like, just sort of left alone, like, throughout the rest of the Cold War, doing a lot of exchanges with Soviet scientists on parapsychological stuff. Stan Grof, obviously, I think was, like, involved in that. Like, really, yeah, like, I think even Pickard got a job in the early 90s. He was, like, going to Russia to, like, study street drugs for, like, I guess he was working at UCLA at the time, like, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. There's a lot of people that had, like, geopolitical interests, and then we're also working on this, like, new age stuff, and then all those experiments with, like, remote viewing and psychokinetic powers, and but I think that, like, the kind of cracking open, like, behavioral science research and, like, realizing how people could be manipulated in groups, like the rise of cults in the 70s. How did everyone get so effective at launching, like, a new age cult that sometimes would turn, like, really sinister, and had all these dynamics we're talking about, like, the sexism, the sort of, like, the abuse dynamic, like the sort of great man guru syndrome of, even if it's, like, allegedly horizontal and nobody's a leader, like, the tyranny of structurelessness, like, all these, almost like experimenting with these cybernetic concepts that were so in vogue at the time, as, like, a better way of maintaining control than maybe a more overt system like the Soviet Union had? Like, what's a more subtle, it's like the CIA kind of sponsoring abstract expressionism to prove how free our society is, but how organic and free our society is, kind of thing. There was a lot of prestige in that, like during the Cold War. And then when America won the Cold War, it's kind of felt like all of our ideas have been validated. All our philosophies that we developed to like destroy communism have been validated and need to be expanded and doubled down on. I don't know. From there, and then Silicon Valley becomes the incubator of whatever the final results of kind of the MK Ultra programs were. It seems like Silicon Valley was the receiver of like certain insights from them. In some cases, because they were working on them, like in the 70s, like Stanford, huge hub. I don't know.
Have you been following the like work of like Dave Troy? Because I feel like he's been digging into some of the like the social financial connections to Russia, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of his work. Like sometimes, like I don't always agree with the lines. I think he's so. He has a very like classic Russiagate focus sometimes, but I think in the process of investigating that, he's found so much like dirty, weird financial shenanigans involving Russia. My take is always that, like for Trump, for example, that the Russian mafia and like the mafia oligarchs of the 90s are really where you look in terms of like connections with America, more so than like some vestige of the KGB like buying off like our politicians or some, like directly buying off Trump, because the Soviet Union collapsed and into this kind of like mafia state that was heavily, all of that, like American banks were up to their necks in, we did a series, we have a series called Contra, and the sort of 8th chapter of that, we did a long series of episodes about the Bank of New York in the 1990s. So a lot of like Israeli intelligence kind of officials kind of vaguely involved, and with people kind of Robert Maxwell types, I would say, and like literally him in some cases. But like the mafias that were able to basically take over all the strategic industries of the Soviet Union and kind of like strip them for parts and then ship all the money back to like New York through the Bank of New York. There's just like, there's a lot of dirt there. That was like a bonanza for the sort of deep state, the deeper structures of like global capitalism, I feel like in the 90s. Like there's so much there. But yeah, I think, even the Esalen, there weren't like that many contacts between the Soviet Union, between like Russia and the United States before 1990. But Esalen was like, they were right there. They were doing hot tub diplomacy. They even brought Boris Yeltsin over, and then he had his psychedelic epiphany in a grocery store. That's what made him anti-communist.
Certainly there are like there's like the tenant media thing. Like that's like just an example of like the very fact that like, okay, that is the thing. Like just imagine like how much like our government is involved in like the like the cultivation and like the management of like the opinions of the American people, and how much money like from like these people are like hand in glove with like some of the people like in the Trump administration, for instance, and like of course there's also it's a bipartisan phenomenon. It's and it goes obviously like we have like the sort of administrative state as well, like beyond, and like the the quote unquote deep state is also like a thing that like has a hand in this stuff. So it's like not it's definitely like the case. Like even like if you look at like you see like things like the tenant media situation, like that's definitely something that happens. Like whether it's like Israel, like and other states around, but like probably the biggest force in that space is not like some insidious like foreign actor. It's probably like our own government. Not to say that like that isn't those governments aren't trying to manipulate opinions in certain directions, but like
I would agree that that to the extent that sometimes the some of the analysis on Russia like has they're not realizing that the call is coming from inside the house. Like the CIA is probably not the CIA, but like the deeper aspects of our state and ruling class, like both public, private, apparatus are probably the ones most intimately involved in like manipulating our our politics, our population, in many ways, because they're the ones who developed those tools in the first place to use abroad. And it's almost like the programs come home to roost eventually. You can see that with like Palantir and what it's doing in Gaza and in other like armed conflicts throughout the war on terror. It's been getting a lot of practice in Ukraine. And then, it might just turn around and sell that back to like our, on the domestic front. But yeah, there's a criminality at the very top of like the American just like ruling apparatus, like a huge rot that like was dressed up in nice idealistic language, but it's almost, I don't know, like America does seem just like America needs to reckon with like the monster it sort of like turned itself into throughout the Cold War in order to become like the supreme, unipolar power. And I don't know.
Do you have any, Neşe, do you have any final, because I feel like we're moving towards the end here.
Yeah.
Do you have any final remarks
suggest.
that, any final things that you want to say, on the subject or?
On kind of adjacent to this, just one like parting thought, just something I'm thinking about and interested in is like, I don't know if you've seen that meme that goes around about like Trump, like voters, where it's because like certain ideas that they people who were in support of Trump like previously were opposed.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's like from Trump, it's like they're all in on it.
It's like
and there's
crying
like,
Wojak, like cheering Wojak. Kind of.
There's one where it's like there's like a chip in the head and like puts in, it like replaces the script with like the new script, and like people are just kind of like operating on that. There's been like I think of that kind of idea because like there's been a number of moments in like the past year where it's like people are given where there's starting to be some cognitive dissonance of like people being like, something that's happening to Psymposia like seems like a bit against like our values. There's been this like effort to like insert, and you see this with Palestine too, like you insert like with the human shields kind of ideas. You insert a story that like solves the dissonance and allows the ideological structure to maintain itself. And so like one example was like we had this like call shared with us where the coordinated campaign targeting us was like being discussed and revealed like after I'd been like singled out, and this like dangerous rhetoric was like directed at us. And there was like someone stepped in to explain why like we actually like deserved it, and someone even like said in response to it like, oh, thank you so much for clarifying that and saying that, because ordinarily this sort of thing would really like concern me and isn't in line with my values. And like there wasn't any further critical thinking about that, of like no one noticed that was just like slotted in to justify this like sense that this thing that actually is not okay is fine. And then the other example I was thinking of was the microdose, which, it put out this kind of like very dismissive like description of our report, where instantly after the like, Psymposia found evidence that they were being like targeted in a coordinated campaign with like millions of dollars behind it. But they actually kind of deserved it because they've been like attacking people, and they're often the ones to lobby the first like attack. And that was really interesting to me, because it's like we actually have not personally attacked anyone. Like that's a completely like made up thing. Like
right.
we have to hold ourselves to such high standards because we're under such scrutiny, and we are trying to do things in a it's like we're actually not attacking people, but it's like it was put in there as a way for people to read it and then feel like the part of them that might have been like, whoa, this seems kind of bad. It's like, oh, actually they deserve it. Actually, this is okay.
You just say something vague about how they crossed a line or something.
Right.
And
it's just straight up Darbo. It's like is exactly what it is, because again, it's like their attacks are like somehow okay, but like, or like, it's always like self-defense or like respectable, normal behavior. Like what they like, and the secrecy element of it like helps to do this. Like, I mean, in a way you can see it as proof of like their consciousness of that it's like not acceptable.
That's what I was gonna say, is that like for a critical thinker, they're actually like they're revealing their hand in doing these like these tactics, but the majority of people that are following this, they don't even see it. It just works on them. Like they're just like they're lulled back into their complacent like perspective on it. And so that's just an interesting component, because I think it connects to like this like engineering of opinion, and like how people can like just like put over a little band-aid on like what would otherwise be a cause to question, like what's actually going on. So but that's kind of the main last point I wanted to say. And well, I do want to say this is actually the first I have been doing anything since like this all started. Like I haven't like been doing podcasts or like live streams at all, and because it's been kind of intense. But so I'm really glad to have like gotten a bit back in the saddle with you guys. And yeah, I really appreciate having had the opportunity to talk with you.
No, of course. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we're like very grateful to have you. Like have been like admires, follows your work for a long time. So I hope it was a good conversation.
Yeah, no, it was super interesting conversation.
And if you and you're welcome back anytime, for sure.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it being on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Neşe. All right.
Have a good night. Thanks so much.
Yes.
All right.
You too.
Bye.
Peace out.